I guess since you didn't get tired of the first 2 lessons, you decided that you wanted to come back and actually learn something about digital marketing as opposed to marketing strategy and branding. Excellent. Thank you for coming back. The first week is really just as a foundation. We could spend weeks and weeks talking about that kind of stuff. I wanted to present just enough information to kind of get you started in that area. So many of you who have done traditional marketing before or who have had any kind of experience either interacting with marketing or doing marketing, a lot of that will either have been familiar or a nice refresher. For those of you who haven't, there's so much more material. If you have any questions on how to take that further, let me know and I'll guide you to some good resources. But tonight we're going to foray into the world of digital marketing and digital analytics. So, last class we talked about how we could gain consumer trust via branding components, personality, mission, values, and promise. How brands define these components and influence customer perception for their brand. How to articulate your brand's components by creating a brand brief, which is one of the many tools that you can use as structures in order to define your brand both internally and then how you communicate that into the world. And then also the effects of positive branding. We learned how specific companies are branding themselves, how they analyze their audiences for the purposes of like empathy, psychographic, not just demographic audience analysis, how they plan through their mission and values, what they say, the personality that they show through their external communications and their place in the market, and what they do as a company, their commitment. We looked at various brands like the pizza companies, Dollar Shave Club, Coca-Cola, and Zappos, of many good brands out there. And the effects of positive branding, including that initial getting people to sign up, to purchase, or to take action, how to retain them and get that repeat business going, increase their customer lifetime value, create brand evangelists, or get people who are really passionate about your product or service to refer more business to action, and ultimately go back to that green one in the middle, which is increasing the customer lifetime value. By the end of tonight, we're changing gears tonight. And we're going to do that a lot in this course, actually. One day we'll be talking about email, the next day we'll be going to SEO, and we're going to be bouncing around for different functions. But tonight we're going to change gears and go to marketing analytics introduction. So we're going to describe the goal of marketing analytics and understand why analytics are important for marketing and in business in general. We'll know what to measure, how to establish a concept called normalcy, which we'll get to, and manage the exceptions to the rules of normalcy. And then we'll apply some of the basics of Google Analytics. We'll go actually into the program and look at the Google Analytics accounts. Hopefully some of you guys got access to a Google Analytics account or set it up for your own website. If not, that's okay. You'll be able to see me go through it up here. It's a great thing to do, and I'll point you to actually in the folder for module 3 this lesson. I can post some links to the Google Analytics Academy that has a lot of helpful videos on how to learn analytics, because we can't teach it all in an hour and a half here in the second half of the course, as well as some helpful links on how to do setup, how to set up goal tracking, e-commerce conversions, etc. So you may use Google Analytics a little differently with different reports than the person next to you. So it's important just to know where to find the tools. I highly suggest learning Google Analytics as you go, especially if you have access to a website. It's a really important program to have an understanding of. There's a few that are just sort of you must learn these if you want to be successful in this kind of role. And that's Google Analytics. Google AdWords is another great one. And also understanding how to move around social media insights like Facebook Insights is another good one. We'll get there later on. So let's start off with a discussion on marketing analytics. If I were to say that marketing data, well, let's define marketing analytics as data produced by online marketing activities. Why do you think marketing analytics is important?
It helps you know actually how effective you're marketing.
Yeah, we're producing data. We want to know. Is that my computer? Wait, that was not something. Okay. Oh, we got things that all right. So yes, it produces data, helps us know how we're doing. What else?
gives you good feedback so you can see how your users are engaging with your product and service.
How what?
It gives you good feedback so you can see how your target audience is engaging with your products and services.
Yeah. So we may want to know not just how people are doing in general, but how our target audience is doing, right? So we'll see some information about like how to break people down into different demographic groups and where they're coming from and what devices they're using. So we can see not just general performance, but also from specific categories of people that we're acquiring as customers or users. Some outside there, yes.
It helps you understand what's working and what's not working.
Yeah, so and that could be in terms of a specific campaign. It could be a specific creative that you're running and testing versus something else, definitely. So I'm going to define analytics. There's various definitions, but I'm going to define it for this purpose of this class as the measurement of movement towards your business goals. Or we'll say the measurement of movement towards your digital marketing goals. A couple good quotes. Fundamental reason why data science is a hot topic now, which it is that businesses want to understand why things happen, not just what is happening. Distinctions between jargon, creative ideas, opinions, and facts. There's a lot of people out there in the marketing world who are irresponsible marketers, and they assert that something is better because it sounds better, or looks better, or is a better message, or has a cooler design, or they say was a better user experience. And I like to say, so what that you think that? Prove it with the data. Is it testable? Can you track it? Can you determine whether or not you were able to achieve your objectives based on using this type of campaign, or creative, or design, or a user experience? Some of the best websites out there are constantly testing all of their creatives and all of their website user experience. There was we'll get to the user experience session for marketers look at website design. We'll get to that about mid-course. And while we were doing the exercise, we were looking at Grubhub. And literally half the class, while we were looking at this Grubhub versus Eat24, we were testing out the experiences between the two websites. And literally half of the class saw a completely different website at Grubhub.com than the other half of the class, because they were in the middle of a session on A/B testing that was happening that week. So rather than assume that you come up with a design, come up with a creative or something that you believe it's going to work. It may work, it may be profitable, right? If you cannot assert that with data, if you cannot test that with data and show why it is better, then it's just an assertion, it's just an opinion, as opposed to a data-driven fact. Continuation of the code. There's always a fundamental reason applications don't suddenly get slow without an underlying cause, nor do people start or stop using the feature without something changing. We may not always be able to find the reasons as well as we'd like, but there's fundamentally an explanation. And whenever you do any type of campaign or target a certain audience, use specific creative, right? Or succeed or fail towards a digital marketing goal, there's always a reason. And data allows us to uncover those reasons. We have to sometimes do a little bit of digging. We have to sometimes connect the dots in certain ways. But there's almost always a way for us to find an answer as to what's working, what's not, and why that's happening, if we do enough testing and experimentation. And we will cover that in this course. So, this brings us back to this topic of old school marketing or traditional marketing versus digital, right? Old marketing has often been thought of as a cost center. We have to spend a certain amount of money on marketing. We have to spend 10 or 15 or 20% of our revenue needs to go to marketing activities, right? Especially when it's difficult to track the performance of those marketing activities. We say, oh, we've always spent 15% and we've always gotten a certain amount of revenue. So if we want more revenue, we need to increase the marketing spend. Or if our revenue goes down, we have to decrease our marketing spend by a specific amount in order to either stay competitive or stay profitable, right? We aim to kill this assertion and prove more directly how marketing has an impact in the world, especially using digital metrics. So we use in old school or traditional, we think a lot about the offline channels. We focus on some of those big broadcast campaigns as opposed to very targeted individual interactions. Sort of a lot of the functions are very siloed and don't interact with each other. Like advertising didn't always interact with PR, didn't always interact with putting up a website and what kinds of things you're doing there and how they're all being integrated. In digital marketing or new school marketing or 2015, 2016 marketing, we're focused on all of the various digital channels to which you can reach people. But we also need to understand that these impact each other. And these produce data that even though you're all driving someone to your website, there's many ways that you can drive them to your website. There's a concept called marketing attribution, where one particular activity is improved by another. There are studies that show that if you do both SEO and search advertising, the performance of both is increased. Not because Google rewards you, but because people have more opportunities to see your business or service, to come across it, to see an impression of it. There are statistics that show that a display advertising campaign improves the performance of a search advertising campaign and makes it more profitable because you're having more consumer touch points and people are becoming more aware of your brand and developing more trust. There's data out there that also shows that the number of touch points that you need to have with a customer has increased from something like 4 or 5 on average across industries before to between 8 or 10 touches for a typical acquisition of a customer, depending on your industry. So I moved away from my topic for a moment. Digital marketing is very focused on individual interactions that are tailored to our experiences, that are focused on relationships, as opposed to these broad messages sent out to people. People expect, and this is the case in so many industries now, people are expecting more and more to have a personal relationship, even if it is a perceived personal relationship with a company. The way when we get to our session on copywriting, we'll be talking about how brands are using more language that speaks about and to the consumer, as opposed to we, us all the time, because consumers are expecting it more and more be about them and their empowerment and their benefit and the things that they want to be able to achieve as consumers using products and services. So that said, in the digital world, all of this produces data. And we know this because we can test these assertions. And we'll be able to test pretty much everything and measure pretty much everything that we do. Remember, before we looked at the questions or tried to answer the questions, why does my business exist? And we answered that with something like an elevator pitch or a positioning statement. A lean business canvas is good to explain how we deliver and capture value. Why our customers care often has to do with our brand and our empathy map. And ultimately, the question of how do I measure success comes down to marketing analytics and the next lesson, which will be on statistics and KPIs. I know that there's like someone put a speaker in the wall or something.
Oh, it's probably on AirPlay.
What's that?
From like a different room.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
I'll tell them to turn AirPlay off.
Thank you. Marketing without analytics is like flying blind. Analytics allow us to confidently make decisions about things. When we gather enough data, it allows us to say whether or not a specific headline is better or a specific creative is better. Or say that our audience of people who are interested in fitness and they're between the ages of 25 and 40 respond better to lifestyle images as opposed to product images. We can make these distinctions in real time as we gather data. Literally the day that certain things happening, the day that people are clicking or going to our website or converting or purchasing products or services. We can use analytics to track performance and trends, such as how our website is performing. Have we made changes to our website? How has that impacted our ability to get sales and increase our revenue during that period of time because of a specific change that we made to our website or to a campaign? It helps us learn about consumer behavior, right? We can look at studies and we can look at industry trends and all of that, but until we put our business in front of people and have a way to measure what they're doing, what pages they're going to, et cetera, then we don't have a way of knowing whether or not it's effective. Got a little music going through. I know what that is. Very good.
It's kind of nice though.
Yeah.
I'll go around and ask some
Okay.
Okay.
It also tells us whether or not our marketing campaigns, our marketing and advertising campaigns are effective or not. When we get to our area on social media, display advertising, and search advertising, we'll see some really deep metrics and analytics on various things that we're measuring for these types of campaigns, both paid and not. some data that tells us pretty much right off the bat what's working, what's not, what's bringing the most volume to our site, etc. And then also what our best performing products and features are, right? An e-commerce site is going to have something built in that tells you what products you're selling, right? But we may not know what products are being sold best or what services are being sold best because of certain campaigns or certain advertising initiatives. We may not know what the most profitable ones are when we consider the media that we're putting out there and what we're paying for, right? And we can track this on a product to page to web page basis. There are so many analytical tools available to us that it'll make your head spin. You can't possibly ever use them all. And as you take this course, more and more programs will be coming out, right? The reason that we don't teach every single new fangled tool is, and yes, I use the word fangled, is because for the same reason that a digital marketing textbook is not often going to be printed, because by the time it's published, it's outdated and there's new tools available to you. Our goal for this course is to teach you the strategy behind it, behind how to identify a problem, choose the right piece of software, and be able to analyze that, use it and analyze it effectively. So we will be going through certain software programs. We'll be going through some of the staples. And as ideas come up, we may throw out a new software or tool or strategy that just came out and is now available. But for the most part, you'll have the skills to be able to say, well, I need this problem to be solved, so I'm going to look for this particular function out there in a software program. It's also to get lost in data. There is so much data that's going to be produced. Any of you who have already jumped into Google Analytics, right? Actually, has anyone used yet Google Analytics or recently put it on their site? Yeah. Have you looked around there yet? There is so much data that you can look at, and most of it is not going to be relevant to you. And it's not going to be relevant to solving a particular problem or answering the questions that you have about your business. In fact, every single function that we talk about in this course, and when we get to SEO and email marketing, search advertising, and display, and retargeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, every single one of those, including every single social media platform that you use, will have its own form of analytics and data that's being produced. When we go into Facebook Insights and download a report on social media metrics, and we're going to see about 60 or 70 different columns in there of data that's produced on a daily basis that we could measure and say something about. You're not going to need 60 or 70 data points on a monthly or daily basis from Facebook in order to determine how effective your Facebook performance is. So it's about looking at the data and saying, what is truly important to us right now? What is a metric that if I were to change this up or down, will have an impact on our financial performance or will help us achieve a marketing objective? And that's really the key to this. And we'll come back to this as we go through each of the functions. By show of hands, raise your hand if you've ever collected or used data that does not seem important to you, or someone gave you a report and you looked at it and you said, why does this matter, or I don't understand how this is relevant. Raise your hand if anyone's ever received a report like that or used data like that before. A few people here there. Yeah, I'll tell you really a quick anecdote for me. When I took over as a PR manager at a music company for a little while, probably before I really knew enough about PR. I was good at writing press releases, product press releases, and pitching a few stories here and there. And there was a report that was developed, and it took about like a half day to produce. It took about like 4 or 5 hours to produce this report. And it measured things like impressions, which is the number of potential views that someone could have of an article that was posted on the website, and also the number of placements and some other metrics. And we had a whole bunch of like charts and graphs for product categories and services and all that stuff. And it took about 4 or 5 hours to produce this report, and I sent it pretty much to all of the executives of the company. I inherited this report from the person who had left the job before me, and they said, yes, we still want to receive this report, it's very important. So on average, it was a music company, and we did like Carrie Underwood songbooks and Beatles and all this other, and Led Zeppelin and church, choir music and marching band, sheet music and all that stuff, right? They were one of the 2 big companies. And so this legacy report had things like placements for guitar songbooks and marching band pieces, and it would go in magazines and online and all that stuff. And the print PR was great. If we got coverage of a product, awesome. We would get all of these websites that were on our mailing list or email list that would post the article oftentimes exactly as I had written it. They would post the press release pretty much verbatim, they wouldn't even touch it. And we'd get like, a couple hundred of these placements, and the company thought, this is wonderful, this is great, we're getting more placements on websites than we ever had before, right? And I was trained to think that more placements equals better performance, right? So as I began to take over this role more and more and learn about digital marketing more and more, I began realizing that just because a songbook for Led Zeppelin guitar songs or whatever, like the fourth CD of this series, just because it got placement on 30 or 40 different websites, it didn't translate into sales, right? Because what I wasn't measuring was what website did it go on and how many people were actually viewing that page. They were doing things like measuring for impressions the number of unique visitors on the entire website, but we weren't looking at how many people were coming from that particular page to the website and actually buying that product, right? So I got trapped in this idea of looking at data points that were legacy data points basically and saying, oh, well, as long as I hit this mark, I'm doing a good job and I'm doing good things for my company. But if I looked at it objectively, I would realize that it didn't mean shit. It didn't matter if it was on 50 websites. What were those websites? How many people were looking at that article? And how many people were coming to the site because of that article and then buying the product online? That's what was important. That's the critical piece that we weren't measuring. Now, of course, nowadays I know better, right? And so if I were to run a campaign like that, I, of course, want to see where that traffic is coming from and what they're doing on the website. And we'll take a look at that type of thing in analytics. So remember that if you're going to measure something, ask yourself, is this movement towards our business objectives or our digital marketing objectives that have a tangible impact on revenue? And we'll cover this more and more over time. So there are various things that we can measure for when looking at analytics. In general, the performance of marketing campaigns, the engagement, and it's a fuzzy word, the engagement of users who go to our social media pages or see our ad or go to our website, etc. The objectives of our campaign, how much revenue that we're creating, what is our return on investment, or how profitable is something that we've invested money into, right? If we've invested in some form of paid media, we generally want to have an idea of, was it a profitable return for us? We also care about diagnostics like consumer behavior, right? What happens on our website. We care about things like patterns of normalcy and acceptance, which we'll get to in a couple slides. And we also care about knowing if the changes we've made is truly optimization. If the changes we've made to certain things that we could measure before has made it better or made it worse. When we do testing and hypotheses later on, we'll look at the right way to do marketing experiments, the right way to test things beyond just simple A/B testing. Various people want to know about these things. Pretty much everyone in the C-suite is going to care about digital marketing if you're doing any kind of significant activity in digital marketing, if you have any significant spend in there, right? Especially the more that business is growing online and going from just traditional business models to more online-based business models, more people in the C-suite are caring about this kind of stuff. So being able to communicate data in a relevant way, it's not just about sending a big report with tons of data to somebody, it's about saying, based on all of the trends and data and what's happening with our campaigns, here are a few gems that are very important that are impacting our business. At the end of this course, you should be able to look at all of the various data points and estimates and audience trends out there and be able to say, this is what's important, this is what I'm going to measure. Maybe you won't even have done a campaign yet, especially if it's conceptual product that you're working on. But you're going to be able to say, these are the data points that are going to matter to us of all the available types of data that we can measure. And this is what we expect out of them. And if we miss that goal, here's how we would improve it over time. We'll talk a little bit more about key performance indicators and calculations in the next list. Some basic things that we're measuring for, we covered this, website visitors, performance predictions in our lab. So there's a lot of things that impact the data that is being produced, right? On your website, in an advertising campaign, etc. The first is having people just simply go to your website, right? You're going to be able to measure the basic amount of traffic to your site, the number of visitors that are going there, the number of unique visitors, people that are new versus returning, etc. We'll be able to measure things like what people are doing and how many people are doing it on social media and in relation to your ads, etc. We'll be able to see some difference in your sales and revenue, especially if it's connected in Google Analytics, or if we have that data plugged into something like Google AdWords or search advertising. We'll also be able to learn a little bit about audience members by seeing what are the types of people that are coming to the site, what are their demographics, where are they from, etc. Time is going to become an important factor too, right? If we were to measure what happens last year versus this year, we'll often see different trends that impact pretty much all of the other data points on our website. When we're looking at things like what a typical conversion rate is, what a typical cost per click on an ad campaign is, things will look very different when you plug in different time periods. And so being able to strategically look at them and say, how does time impact this metric based on whether we made a change or not, based on whether our company people are more aware of our brand now than they used to be, et cetera. There's going to be a lot of tools that we use for this: marketing software, CRM systems, Google Analytics, Google AdWords, Facebook Insights, et cetera. So we'll get to that. And then there's different ways that companies also track these people, right? Most websites are starting to have pixels or pieces of code on them that are simply there for the purposes of tracking people. Hopefully, any website that you're actually working on already has a piece of code embedded in the header across the entire website for Google Analytics. But there's going to be other pieces of code that we'll talk about, like remarketing pixels, so you can continue to advertise to people in the future, or heat mapping tools, so you can see as people are going on your site what they're actually clicking and where they're scrolling and what they're looking at. In fact, there's even tools out there where you can watch someone's mouse go over different areas of your site as if you're kind of screen capturing their session on your website. You get an idea of actually how they're browsing and scrolling and moving around. But regardless of the tools that we use, because there's so many different tools and various functions, right? There's 5 main steps that we're going to look at in terms of any digital marketing analysis, right? The first thing that we need to do is we have to understand what is our KPI, what's our key performance indicators that are important. I'll define this again next class, but by this I mean, what are the highest level metrics impacted by digital marketing that cause our business to succeed or fail on a revenue basis, right? This will absolutely be a part of your final presentation. You should have 2 or 3 KPIs that you say, these are our levers of success, whether it's an increase in revenue from new sales, whether it's increasing your average order value on an e-commerce site. If you're a site for an online or mobile application, increasing your new membership by a certain amount, right? If you're trying to measure appointments for an in-person business, saying we want to increase our appointments by a certain amount. If you have a static conversion rate on your site, or if your website is a media company and you make money off of advertising, it might be we want to increase the number of people who actually come to our site and see ads and generate money for us, right? So there's a lot of different levers for each one of our individual businesses, and it's about identifying what those levers are and then seeing what metrics impact them, right? So a typical one for an e-commerce site, visits times a particular conversion rate times the average price that people spend on your site, or the average order value, ultimately equals revenue, right? So if you increase any one of those things, your conversion rate, the number of people who visit your site, or the average order value, then your revenue goes up. And so it's about identifying what is the equation for our revenue and what activities can we do to increase that. Second step is establishing normalcy, understanding what is normal for our business, right? And I know I keep mentioning this word, we'll get to this in the next slide, but basically saying what is normal for our business, what is typical in a day, a week, a month, a year, right? And not just in the number of people that are coming to our site or the amount of revenue that we make, right? Or what people do, what our conversion rate is, what our average order value is on the website, right? Or what is the percent chance that someone goes from a free member to a paid member? Anything that is typical in terms of data or other marketing metrics or revenue metrics that impact your business. Once we have an idea of what's normal on any given basis, say holidays and other special events that happen that could impact your business, we also want to be able to identify when things happen that are outside of the norm. So, and we'll do an activity on this in a bit. When something happens that causes a spike or a dip in the performance of a metric that we care about, whether it's something like our number of conversions or our revenue, et cetera, or our website. And being able to identify, was it caused by something that we did, Or is it caused by something that happened in the marketplace or a trend that's going on right now, right? Fourth is to compare and contrast what you're doing, right? Being able to look at the difference between different marketing channels, like for instance, Google search versus Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. Looking at how email marketing is doing compared to advertising performance. Next lesson, we're gonna work on some equations and do a little bit of math to determine the differences, the relative differences between different traffic sources and how that impacts some of the data points that we're going to learn about tonight. But also being able to say, well, we ran this campaign and we did 2 different emails to the same audience, or we did an ad campaign, we split test them to determine what types of images or headlines or offers or discounts or loyalty programs tended to perform better. So being able to compare and contrast those in a meaningful way and learn what is better and how do I know that it's better. And how do I know to do that or not do something in the future? Yes.
You just said something that I don't think I completely heard. You said something about email marketing versus something else.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so it's not just about looking at the performance of 2 different ad campaigns to a particular audience and saying which one's better, right? We need to be able to compare and contrast any particular activity. You want to, and you will by the end of this course, be able to look at the difference between the email campaign that you did that has this particular offer. Oh yeah. Yeah, all the really sad marketing campaigns. Be able to look at email versus advertising and say, maybe one gives us more revenue, but perhaps one is more profitable on our time and investment, etc. Or gets us a lot more volume even if it's not as profitable. And then finally, being able to say, well, great, now that I know what performs better and where we get more traffic and what's more profitable, how do I optimize these types of campaigns and activities, right? Or develop programs that have a greater impact on this, right? So we want you to be able to do that by the end of this as well. So I talked about this idea of normalcy. Normalcy is basically what do you expect on a regular basis. If you've been in business for a year, and over the course of that year, you're gathering data, hopefully. You're gathering data about how many people come to your website, where they come from, how long that they're on the website, what they're doing when they're there, what's the percentage chance that they're going to convert, how much money do you make from these people? And then how do you segment those into different slices so that you can say, well, people from California tend to spend more on products or services than people from Oregon, right? And be able to get an idea of why that might be the case. So, but over time, normalcy is going to be like, what is the average cost per click? Are we going to spend something like 50 cents on a cost every time someone puts on our ad campaign, or is it going to be $5, right? What's normal for us over time? And as you collect more data, right, when you go from 10 clicks to 100 clicks to 500 clicks on your ad campaign, you're going to get a better sense of what your normalcy is. So basically, it's going to look like, it's going to look like this, and this sort of happens for website visits, advertising performance, click-through rates, pretty much any data point that you can think of. I'm sorry for the guys over there. It's going to start out like this, and sometimes it's going to be high, sometimes it's going to be low, but then over time, as you gather more data, you're going to get a more average trend of what happens, or it'll have just slight fluctuations over time. This is reaching data normalcy, because what you want to do is before you make big decisions about your website or the effectiveness of campaign, you want to get an idea of what the average is going to be. Make sense? So this actually comes up in a lot of different contexts, right? Very often, like for instance, if I start a new ad campaign with somebody and we run like a Google AdWords, they spend about $500 or $1,000, and at a certain point they say, okay, how is it working, right? And if they've only gotten maybe like 50 or 60 clicks on all of the different ads, right? That may not be enough data to say definitively whether or not something works. And that could be something like this, right? Let's say they get 50 clicks on their ads, and one day this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. One day, they get zero sales, right? They get 0 conversions. But then the next day they get 1 conversion or 1 sale. It's very early on in their campaign, right? On day 2 here, you may think that your campaign is performing well, but on day 3, you may think, oh, you must have done something. The campaign's not performing as well. But the reality is that often you just don't have enough data over a period of time to determine whether or not something's effective or not. The difference between 0 and 1, or 1 and 2, or even 5 and 10 on given days can have a drastic impact if you were to stop in that moment and say, this is what's going to happen every day. But over time, you'll start to get a sense of what the average is. Oftentimes it takes a long period of time, maybe a week, maybe 30 days, maybe even 6 months if you're not gathering that much data. There's no magic point when you've gathered enough clicks or conversions where you can definitively say this is what's going to happen forever. Some people like to say, okay, if you've gotten 200 clicks on an ad campaign, 200 clicks on something, then you get a sense of what someone's click-through rate is going to be. But if you've only gotten 10 sales out of it, you can't definitively say how many sales you're going to get on a regular basis. We'll see examples of this later on, but the point that I'm trying to make is that with normalcy, it's basically how sure are we that this is going to be the average? How long has this trend been occurring? Or when we look at a span of 30 days versus the next 30 days, or whether we look at a week versus the next week, are we seeing the same thing pretty much happening on a regular basis? So in website analytics or website performance, we might be looking at normalcy as to how much website traffic are we going to get, right? Do we get the same traffic week to week versus month to month? Right? Is that pretty stable, or do we see the trend going up and down? With search marketing, how many people are searching for specific terms that we care about? If 10 people are searching for it one day and 30 people searching the next day, then we don't know exactly how many people are searching on average, right? But if over the course of a month, we get a sense of how many people are searching in that month, we can more accurately say on an average daily basis. With advertising, how much you're paying per click, right? We'll look at examples when we get to search advertising where you can estimate approximately the range that you're going to pay every time somebody clicks on your ad. But one day you may pay 50 cents, another day you may pay $1. That doesn't definitively tell you whether you're going to pay 50 cents or $1. But over the course of a month, if you have 500 clicks and it's around 70 or 80 cents, that's a much more definitive answer, because the difference between 50 cents and $1 has a huge implication on your profitability. But you'll know much more surely if you see it at 75, 80 cents over a period of time. That gives you much better information to make decisions about a profitable ad campaign. With email marketing, we'll see this in terms of how many people are opening your emails, clicking on your content, going to your website and converting from the email, right? If you send out an email campaign with 100 people, and 20 of those people open the email and 3 or 4 of them click, that's not enough data to determine what your long-term open rate and click-through rate on your email is going to be. As you gather more data and start to see like hundreds of people taking these actions, again, your average percentages will become more clear over time. Questions on normalcy? Yes.
So is a conversion just anything taking place as an intended result, not necessarily a sale?
Yeah, actually, and thanks for asking that. So when we talk about conversions and we'll talk about conversion rates too when we get to analytics. A conversion by marketing definition is anything that you are measuring that is along the path of your ultimate goal of revenue, basically. So for a business that is acquiring leads for its sales team, right? If a sale is closed by a sales rep, whether if it's a financial institution, it could be like someone who's trying to help you refinance your home, right? Or if you're, let's say, like an insurance sale or whatever, then you get a certain number of leads that get sent to you, or if you're a realtor or something like that. Then only a certain number of those leads will turn into closed sales. That's a leads-based business, right? Then your conversion ultimately is how many leads do you get, right? You don't get immediate revenue. If you're an e-commerce site, a conversion for you is going to be sales on your website. Someone actually submits their payment and makes a certain amount. If you're a mobile application company, then a conversion for you may be 2 things. It may be getting a new user to sign up and download your mobile application, create an account. It may also be when you get someone to go from a free user to a paid user and all of a sudden start spending on that mobile game. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that. If you're running a sweepstakes, like a sweepstakes that people can enter for free, then a conversion may be someone actually putting in their information and submitting their entry for that sweepstakes, right? That can be a conversion in the context of that marketing campaign, which is to get people to sign up for the sweepstakes. Cool, makes sense. So, given these types of data normalcy for email marketing, advertising, search, website, what do you think normalcy would be for instance, your social media pages?
I mean, for my Instagram, we're checking every day how many likes, how many followers, what the engagement rate is.
Do you see it different on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, definitely. I can see that like Thursdays and Fridays are really strong for us. Afternoons on Wednesdays are really strong for us. I know that product photos are better for us than that strong for this, so I want to see that.
Yeah.
And wait, sorry, and the way you're seeing that is because of the likes?
I track the likes. I use a couple of, software packages out there that aggregate everything that's going on in their Instagram channel. For example, give me daily weekly reports. They can tell me what hashtags they're looking for. They can tell me what posting times and days of the week are some of the best responses. Pretty good data. Obviously, I don't know.
So what you're saying is that, let's say, what'd you say, Fridays?
Thursdays and Fridays are strong for us. Saturdays, sometimes there, sometimes there. But Thursday, Friday afternoon always kills.
Okay. So let's say, for instance, that your data kind of looks like this, and then Thursday and Friday, it goes up, and then it kind of goes down for the week. And then Thursday and Friday, it goes up, and then kind of down for the week. That's kind of one trend you're seeing, right? And if you were to measure different things, like if you were to measure month to month, it might look a little bit more like this. 1 month compared to the next month if you were just to look at these data points. But on a daily basis, you see different trends, right? So it's being able to look at those and say not just what happens on Thursdays and Fridays, but perhaps from month to month what happens. Maybe there's certain times of year or certain events that happen, or a certain release of a product, right? Or a certain trend in the industry, the way that people are searching. So let's say though, for instance, that you do something on Instagram and one day it skyrockets, right? If you were to just simply look at the data point from that, you could easily come up with conclusions that are not valid about just the general traffic, right? Or let's say like on one day it like performs terribly and it's down here, right? You could come up with conclusions if you just look at the short range of time that's not accurately reflected by your typical performance. These are called exceptions to the rule. Either you do something that's really good and you get phenomenal performance, or you do something that's not so good or just doesn't really reach people, or just the law of random behavior. It just doesn't happen to be good on a certain day. And so it's important to be able to look at those things and say, is there a reason why it doesn't perform as well, right? Or is it in a market trend? Is it something that just didn't do as well? Is it because we A/B tested something and B version performed badly and we should go back to A version? So always look for those types of things, but we'll come up with different examples of them too. So this is basically what the rule of exceptions is. There are some times where we're not doing things that are as profitable, or we don't get as much traffic, or fewer people, or a lower percentage of people are clicking through or converting, especially when volume is relatively low. Like the time period that we're looking at, we've only had a smaller set of data being produced, right? So we'll see much bigger fluctuations. However, even over large time periods, we'll sometimes see that something will happen and we won't know why there's a huge dip or why there is a major change in our performance. So let's say, for instance, that we're talking about a period of time like a year, and we're looking at something like website visits. We'll see this metric in analytics on the second half. But let's say we're looking at how many people came to our website, right? If we were looking at, let's say, I'm just going to draw 12 data points. Divide 12, right? We can look at data and create whatever kind of stories we want to. Politicians are amazing at this. They look at a piece of a data set and their team says, well, if we compare it to this time period or this other data set that's somewhat irrelevant, then we can make a really strong case and get people to rally around us for something. No matter what side you're on, this always happens, right? So let's say, we're talking about like January to December. We're looking at the last part of the year. And let's say that our traffic, our website traffic, does something like that, right? It doesn't really matter what this range is. It could be, thousands, it could be hundreds of thousands, it could be millions. It doesn't really matter. It's all relative, right? Let's assume it's like, we'll say 1 million, 1.5 million, 2 million, right? So pretty substantial differences in the traffic over time. There's a lot of reasons why this could happen, but this does happen, right? If we were to consider the time periods, like for instance, the same time versus just before, sequential, like your boss asks, well, hey, what was performance last month in October versus performance in September? How many visits we had? So let's see, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, right? So if we were to look at October here versus September, right? We might see a difference of maybe 500,000 visitors, which is pretty substantial on this range, right? If they say, well, what about if it's from 2 months ago? Then it's substantially different. And you say, oh man, it's actually a whole million number of visitors that are different. But if you frame it a little differently, and he says, well, how do you base that versus like 6 months ago? 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 6 months ago, you actually had a decrease, right? So it's all about the way that you frame this. There's a lot of different ways that we can look at these time periods. So for instance, the same time versus just before, same period versus a time last year, same versus 6 months ago. Or we could also say like, well, what was the percentage on this day last year or this month last year? Or the percentage versus the average, right? If we were to look at what the average performance is for this, it'd be somewhere around what, like 1.5 or so? That's probably around the average or so, right? So unfortunately, it fluctuates so much, and over the course of a year or so, it won't always go up or down this much. But what if we were to change this data, right? Like let's say that this is what the traffic actually was, but let's change this to something like a percentage chance that someone will convert on our website. This type of fluctuation can be very common. Think of this as like an e-commerce site, for instance, Hallmark.com, right? The difference between 1% of people converting and 2% of people converting could be the difference between, adding a page in the process of completing your purchase, like adding an additional step, right? You could definitely have a percentage increase or decrease on that. So when you think about what's the percentage of people converting 2 months ago versus 6 months ago, you have to think about what's the context. What did we do during this period of time that could cause that data fluctuation? So depending on what metric that you're looking at and what you've done on your site, whether it's a campaign that you ran or a change that you made on your website, there could be major implications. So again, it's all about framing. It's how you're framing the data and the data point that you're measuring. But there's these 3 time comparisons. This time versus last time, or today versus last year, today versus 6 months ago. Or what is the percentage or the number today versus the average over a period of time. There are times that we want to measure all of those things. So it's just about knowing when it's appropriate to do that. So I want to do a quick activity. Actually, any quick questions on normalcy and exceptions and looking at the difference between time periods before we go? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because what you'll find is as you start to use these accounts, you'll see that certain posts, certain subject matter and certain types of posts do better than others. And sometimes it's wildly different. You get 10 times the engagement on one type of post than the post you did before. And it should teach you something about like what you should or shouldn't do with your audience, or the types of topics that they care about or don't care about. Or it could be based on the time of day or the day of the week, right? A post that doesn't work so well on Wednesday may work well on a Saturday or Sunday, just based on the subject matter or your audience profile, when the people that you are targeting tend to use social media more often. So these are the types of things that could either be different subject matter, or it could be just other factors like when you're actually doing it, or the timeliness of it. Is there anything in the current events that impacts this? So there's always, and it really is going to depend on the company and the target market and what insights you can drive. But yeah, absolutely. Okay. So putting it in groups of 2 or 3, find at least one person you haven't worked with before. What you're going to do is you're going to choose 2 of the businesses, Hallmark.com, Huffington Post, Disney Pictures, and Intuit, which is a TurboTax company. And you're going to look for factors that could create exceptions to data normalcy. So you have to first think about what would data normalcy look like for these kinds of companies. So think about things like site visits, some form of customer engagement, whether it's social media or what people do on the website, but ultimately think about revenue as well, right? What's the revenue look like for these types of companies? Not all of these are companies that have a very typical, you go online, you purchase a product or service. So you need to think about what would the online presence for this type of company look like, and how does that impact their revenue at the end of the day, right? So you're going to think about what does data normalcy look like for these types of companies. You don't need specific numbers. And then when would an exception to this rule happen? For instance, when might a company's website traffic spike during a particular time or an event that's related to that business? When might their revenue go up or go down significantly based on periods of time or events that may happen or any other reasons? So, so basically, again, choose 2 businesses with your partner, the 3. Think about what will produce this level of data normalcy over time, and then think about what might happen that over a period of time something may spike either up or go down based on something that happens. And be able to say why you think that will happen over a period of time, whether it's a seasonality or an event for the company. What would happen and why would that happen if you could predict the company's next year out? And then think about things, site visits, conversions, or actions on the website, revenue, etc. If you have a few minutes, we're going to take about 20 minutes for this. Think of a completely unrelated business. Predict this for your own business. What might data normalcy and exceptions that will look like in the next 6 months for you or a year out, assuming just regular growth for your company? All right, go ahead and call me over if you have a question on this.
I don't even want I discovered you're like, I would find
Oh, yeah. Right, you guys,
once you get into a system, once you get to like past 12 or 13, it's like you're going to get everything that's out. Like it's 20, like it's 13, just every good citizen. But they all You gotta get a Markteing. Yeah, so like what you're really looking for is like, when you write with certain the big thing is more important about networking sometimes, right? So like, over a period of time, when would you expect something to dramatically change? There's something faster than site visits. Yeah, so if you do like a breaking news story that comes out, maybe May, breaking sites, like it's a bigger story than like the biggest news story of the year. Disney Oh, it's just choose your business. There's so many groups you can't really. Hey guys, are you on your second business yet? What do you guys We're gonna take 5 more minutes to share. 5
a startup where
Like different times they do for advertising, or there's details, can you talk about that?
Sorry.
Now it's easy. So like I started out my day with I just had it and I was like, well, there's all this Thanksgiving left over, so I'm gonna break it. But I just do that. By the end of the night, I'm starving. You know, so one of the healthy reasons why it's easy to regulate my diet. I'm not gonna be like breaking
Well, we got times like Disney and ABC and so just ways, you know, minions
Next week is my last week of because right now I was doing clients a week now, but I have 3, and then I'm just like finally like now I feel like I mean it's just more time to get so like I'm excited like finally great time and start working out here. My diet's not terrible, but I'm not something like I'm actually underweight what I was. But like I'm probably like 15 pounds
well, with Disney's business context, then
Two more minutes, no chair. 2 more minutes.
And they can start pushing that forward your results.
So if they expect technology to discover things this, you're expecting, but if they know what things in the past
Okay, take a seat, finish the last thought. I'm sharing to you guys a break. All right. I need like a cowbell. So I want to start with Hallmark.com. So if you did, someone from your group, raise your hand if you did Hallmark.com as one of your selections. Let's start with you guys in the back. Tell me a little bit about some of the things that you were considering when you're thinking about Hallmark.com and online metrics that you would establish normalcy for.
Well, we figured for Hallmark, normalcy is people are consistently buying X amount of cards throughout the year, but you can clearly see spikes around major holidays.
Mhm.
So Christmas, for example, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day.
So something that looks a little bit like this, maybe?
Yep.
Where these spikes are kind of like the holidays, right? And there's always going to be a certain level, but then they have a ramp up to those holidays, right?
So we get kind of a question about that actually. Because there's sort of that regular spike, is that actually normalcy then?
That is.
It
For a
is.
company like that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, and a couple other people asked this question as we went. It's considered normalcy if you're looking at a trend that you're expecting to happen in a certain way. So let's say that this is February, right? What happens in February? Valentine's Day, right? If you were to look at February versus the beginning of January, right? And let's just say we're talking about, I don't know what their actual thing was, we're talking about like tens of millions, right? 10, 20, 30, right? Maybe online. I don't know what their actual online revenues are. But there could be a significant difference between the online sales that happen in January and February. So if you were to look at it sequentially, then it's almost like an expected exception to the rule, right? You'd have a different marketing budget, you plan for it differently. But then what happens if you were to see this as opposed to last year, right? So this is like 2015, and we have January and February on 2014, right? And you see something like, kind of like that, like let's say from 2014 to 2015, their average performance increased, and they had a difference between, like let's say this is more like 25, and this is like 35 million or whatever, right? It's still considered somewhat normal when you compare it year to year, and so it really is about the context. It is sort of an exception to the rule if you consider then what happens again in March, right, versus whatever the next big holiday is. So in that case, it's sort of that, maybe you call it the exception, maybe you call it normal, but it depends on what you're comparing it to in that place. If, without thinking about why, it's going to be higher or lower, whether it's website visits or conversions or average order value, whatever metric that you're looking at, without the context around it, you could make mistakes in how much you're spending, what activities you do, what your marketing strategy is going to be. So this is somewhat of an obvious example, but this actually pops up in a lot of different ways, as you'll see with even your own businesses, where you need to think about, well, why is it different during this time period? There was a trend. I was working with a t-shirt company, and he was getting a ton of traffic, right? For a certain period of time, he was doing, he was a startup, so he was doing like thousands of dollars in sales on a daily basis for a period of time. His traffic looked a little bit like it started out really low, and then all of a sudden it spiked, and it was doing this, and then it kind of like went down or whatever. Now, during this period of time, if you were to just look at this trend, you might think that it's going to go up and up and up and up, right? The reality was, when you consider what happened during this time period, he was sending out samples to journalists, and he got press coverage for it. It was one of those t-shirts where if you hold it up just kind of like this, and you pour water or wine on it, it will just roll around and then fall off, right? And it'll never actually stain the t-shirt. It's called hydrophobic clothing. It's just the way that the material is made, right? And so there was a period of time where like Mashable or TechCrunch were actually giving him articles, and it was driving a lot of traffic to his site. Once that subsided, it kind of went down to basically what a new normal for him was, or it was probably a little bit more like this, where it was higher than zero or basically nothing, but it wasn't this level of data. This is where this type of trend will happen in a lot of different ways, but in this case, it is more of an expected exception to the rule question. Did you guys come up with anything else for Hallmark? The idea is mostly seasonality, basically. So what decisions would you make then? If you know that this type of thing happens over time, what decisions could you make? From a business and marketing perspective, just high level, yeah.
You might think about when you're launching a new seasonal collection, maybe think about launching it sooner.
Right, so it can impact the timing of your operations. What other differences could you make in the marketing strategy? Yeah.
Your volume of production.
What do you mean your volume of production?
Like you may ramp up making cards, maybe in November, anticipating December, Christmas, February, time.
So operationally, if you know that something's going to happen, you could do things earlier to save a little bit of money. You may do more volume of things if you know that a certain event's going to happen, or if you're expecting something to happen. What about money?
Budget distribution.
Budget distribution. And here's where you can start testing things out, right? If you know what you did last year, right, and you know what your budget was last year, right? What if we decide to invest a little bit more in advertising or marketing promotions? We have a certain set of things that we know works, but what if instead of spending, maybe $5 million in advertising, we bump it up to $7 million in advertising, and we weren't to change anything else, targeting the same people but just doing more, reaching more people? What would that do to sales, right? So you can start to look at things like expected exceptions to the rule, or a year-to-year normalcy, and start to change things and see what kind of impact that has. As long as you can measure the direct impact, which we'll see how to do in digital advertising. Yes?
You could also look at the flip side of that and say that that's a mature piece of your business, and take $2 million of that and throw it at another piece of the business, if you don't think you can grow it any further.
Yeah, so what we're looking for is, what is the incremental growth? Like, are we gonna get, if we add on an additional 40% in advertising, are we gonna get an additional 40% in growth? Or are we going to get at least $2 million in additional, not just revenue, but profits? We need to be able to test those things, and if we don't, then we just learned a really expensive lesson, perhaps. But these are decisions that are made operationally, look more like marketing operations. These decisions are made all the time.
But what were you just saying, that you're basically creating a new product to see if that will help drive sales? Is that what that was?
Oh, like go to a different product.
Like adding e-cards to that or something?
Possibly, yeah.
Is that a way to move the budget around for marketing?
Yeah, and I mean, the sky's the limit on the types of decisions you could make, whether it's changing your product category or looking at what are the reasons. Maybe we had 35 million this year, and we had 25 million in sales last year. Maybe not simply when you're planning ahead, but if you're out in this month over here and you're looking at the difference between these two, being able to say, why did this happen, right? If you can determine why this happened, or at least pinpoint some ideas as to why that worked or why it was that way, then all of a sudden you're gaining insights about your marketing activities, potentially your sales activities, the way that your website developed. If you had a major shift, if your entire website was redesigned from year to year and you saw a complete lift, both in the normalcy and in the exceptional months, those seasons, then that's something to look at, definitely.
How do you definitively answer that why question, other than trying to correlate events with outcomes? I mean, do you have to get into like econometrics kind of situation with it? Do regression analyses and all of that?
You can, as a high,
I'm gonna quit, right?
At the enterprise level, this does happen. You have, statisticians and people who are purely looking like when you have an economist at a company, the company gets that large, they are looking at those kinds of things. They're looking at every factor, every piece of data beyond just marketing to determine what could have made this impact. But very often, we make changes that you can attribute back to certain times of year or certain actions, and you can see trends that it's not just going to be the revenue that increases on its own. There's often other things associated with it. Like we're doing so many digital activities. We haven't gotten into the ways that we mention those activities, but we may see that when we look at it, Google Analytics, which we'll cover after a break, we'll see that there's allocations for what comes from advertising, maybe a certain amount of traffic came from social media, maybe a certain amount came from organic search, right? Or maybe a certain amount came because we improved our website and our conversion rate, or the percentage of people who come to our website and then purchase, right? 1 out of 100 people went to 2 out of 100 people purchase, right? If we can look at those data points, we can start to create a story of how all these little changes added up to the difference between 25 million and 35 million in sales. So yes, if the skills that we're developing in this course will give you insights as to what to look for. But the purpose for now is, when you look at from 35 down to this 10 million a year, it seems like a drop. But when you look at what it should be or what you expect it to be in the past, it's much more significant than you see again at that point. And now you know what you should start looking for, right? But in February versus February versus February. Okay. Let's go on to TurboTax real quick. Who did TurboTax? Anyone? Okay. Did you guys come up with this?
The graph should be like steady, and then a high peak in April and another high peak in September.
Okay.
Because that's the tax season.
Tell me about September. I never do my taxes in September.
Corporate taxes.
Corporate taxes. Bingo. Right. So let's say January, we'll say April right here, and then September, December. I didn't break this down perfect quadrant, but right. So the season, there's some that starts kind of in January, right? It goes up and up and up and up and up and up and up, and then maybe some people are finding late, and so it comes down, and then up probably. And then it probably comes back up to a certain degree. Something like this, right? And it goes down, or sharply drops off to a certain point where it gets down to January, or maybe ramps up. So something that looks sort of like this, basically, right? Because it's these tax seasons. So you literally can't download or purchase the software or spend money on the site during other months because they haven't released the next version of the tax system, of the tax software yet. Because rules have changed, they're redesigned, they're looking for new tax rules. The giant book of tax codes. They're reformulating their software in order to prepare for that, right? Which is a huge, huge investment for them. So, if you look at their other things like their cost structure, I don't know if this is necessarily true, but when the new tax codes or whenever laws are passed or whatnot, they might need to at the end of the year or like in between these seasons, they might have something that looks like this as far as costing based on the development resources to restructure the software between seasons, right? I don't know exactly what it would look like, but we would see a very different curve for redoing the software for the next season. So, is there anything else you guys thought of for this?
Yeah, if there's like a recession or something that could, an exception, a normal city, where there's, where people are visiting.
What would that do, you think, to things like, for instance, the revenue of people using your tax?
The people will be unemployed, so they will lose their job and then they will need to do
So there's all sorts of theories. I mean, we could have more people who end up using the software instead of hiring CPAs. It's a little bit cheaper for them, right? So most people, as long as their taxes are relatively simple. So there's all sorts of theories that could happen. I want to move on. I'm going to do one more, and then we'll go on to our break and come back and do some Google Analytics. So does anyone brave Disney Pictures?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, let's start with you guys. Disney Pictures. So Disney Pictures, and just to clarify too, we mean like, the film studio basically that produces movies like, Frozen, and Aladdin and all that stuff. So they have a website, and you're not necessarily, it's not to get a lot of people to purchase. They don't make most of their revenue off of the website. They actually make their revenue from, the performance of a movie, right? So when you think about the metrics that you look at, right, whether it's website metrics or some kind of like any kind of revenue associated with the website, what kind of came to mind for you guys that you would think is significant to measure online?
Well, time period, dates.
Tell me more.
During the holidays, we might see movies we'll be looking at, things like that.
Yeah, so if we're looking at like January, December again. And this could, by the way, this could be like June to June of a given year. Like you're always gonna have a different year if you're looking at a year depending on the season, right? So if our metric was movie releases, right? They might have a certain amount. And I don't know if this is true or not, but it may go up during a certain period of time, or they may have a growth during like the summer as well, right? So they may release more movies. What types of metrics would you associate then with that happening?
Are you asking about KPIs now?
Metrics or KPIs. So like could be a high level revenue, or it could also be like website visits or whatnot.
Box
So,
office sales.
yeah, box office sales. So there's a few ways that we could look at this, right? We could look at it as movies are coming out, we're seeing a trend kind of that coincides with the numbers of movies, right? What about at a movie to movie level?
Well, the kinds of movies, family films as opposed to films that are going to attract the young male summer audience.
Right.
Different pricing for those movies.
Yeah, so they're going for, you've got different movies what I'm getting at is different movies that are being released at a given time. So if we were to look at perhaps the cycle of a movie itself, you may have a trend that does this over time or ramps up, and then we have more, and this will go across everything like social media performance, website visits, ancillary sales.
Right.
So they may see a general trend that does this, but they may have a lot of little trends based around the cycle of an individual product or a movie, because every product or every movie has its own life cycle, right? It starts out and it has like a large, and then over time it kind of peaks out, but then you have this long tail of like international sales, merchandise. If the movie picks up, if it's like a Star Wars, then it just kind of continues on forever. So. And let's get outside of marketing for a second. If Disney is able to predict this, right, because they're releasing different kinds of movies and different kind of life cycles and whatnot, what could that help them do strategically? Manage their money, budget, right? They get an idea of how much money they should put in, not just for movies in general, but specific genres and during specific times of year. Let's go along with the time of year point. What else could you do knowing the general performance of certain kinds of movies and how movies do during certain times of year?
Well, I don't think this is where you're going with it, but, we can leverage it with our other products, right? So Disney doing Moonlight or,
Right. It impacts like, so if a ride is coming out at the same time when they time it, then maybe they can make a movie do that instead. Yeah, definitely.
They could merchandise as well.
Mhm.
movie schedule.
So, sure, I mean, summer release is gonna be the DVD for the Christmas season, and then family films will be released for the Christmas season.
Right, so they're always looking for ways to kind of increase that long tail and improve the sort of total revenue out of that. Someone else had a. What about the order, like, let's think about like what the target audience for different, it's not always the same exact group of people that Disney is targeting for these movies, right? Might they also time the genre or like their age group or that they're targeting, right? Maybe they don't put two target audience movies right next to each other. I'm not great with Disney movies, but with the different variations of age groups that they're going after, right? They might do like their big marquee for the year. They might separate it from the next kind of marquee. They might do kind of their smaller films, the films that aren't planning on doing as well. They may make other decisions about like releasing a movie from the vault. We're doing other things with the brand in between kind of the big marquee releases so that they're allocating it better, right? So if they have, a handful of small movies, then they know that they're going to have a big one. Or let's just say that this is one particular audience group. They're not going to put another movie that targets that same audience group right here. They might wait a few more movie cycles and space it out more, right? Because they know that their average will be better. Their average total revenue for the year will be better if they're kind of spacing it out, right? It's why you don't see companies that do like a horror film, like they're not doing them just for 3 months and then stopping, although that's typical that happens more around the Halloween time period. They're spacing them out to kind of even out the revenue. Once the cycle is pretty much ending, it's time to ramp up another one so that they can increase the revenue across the board. There are implications for this in digital marketing as well, aside from just operations, right? Remember that marketing is involved with what types of products out there, what types of services does the market need to begin with. But it could also be used to allocate, like if we have a certain amount of advertising budget for the year, where and when do we allocate that budget to be the most effective and get the best returns, right? If we spend a lot of it on marquee and we put the majority of it here, sure, that may be effective, but we get to a certain point in advertising, it's at $5 million to $7 million advertising. There may be a point where spending more money on advertising for that one time a year isn't going to have much of an incremental impact. But if we take that $2 million and put it to other kind of times of the year, other products that we're not promoting as much, we may get a higher net gain because of it, right? So let's say, for instance, that we don't think smaller product, right? We don't do much advertising on these kind of products here, right? We've traditionally only spent our advertising on this big product release, right? And we've seen a couple examples of great product release happens. And we see like, we've spent $5 million and we get it to this point. But we don't spend it here. We only spend another $5 million for the next big marquee product release or service or whatnot, right? So the question is, well, we've got $2 million more in budget that we can allocate this year. We had a pretty good year, right? Should we just boost up the big products and just do page takeovers on all these big websites and do more Facebook ads and all that? Do we promote it more heavily to get a bigger rise from here? Or do we focus on areas that are not doing a lot of advertising? Because the difference between 5 and 7 you could theoretically just get a little bit higher. And that amount of money may not be as significant than if you invest it on areas where you're not doing as well normally and getting a much better long-term gain with this $2 million here, $2 million here. So this is where understanding normalcy and exceptions over the long run. We don't have all of the tools yet to be able to make these decisions, but as we learn more about, especially paid media, advertising, those kinds of things. We'll see where that can come into play. On a scale of one finger means I don't understand this very well. 5 fingers means I understand this pretty well and I get the point. Everyone raise your hand and give me a 1 to 5 on this, so I can gauge the room. Okay, if you're at kind of a 3 or lower, feel free to either email me or see me after class about anything you're confused about. I'm more than happy to help. Most of us, most people are either at 4 or 5, but there may be something I missed that's relevant to your business. I'd love to help you out with that. Let's take a 8-minute break. I'm going to start it. It's 8:42. I'm going to start again at 8:50, and we're going to dig into Google Analytics for a bit. It's 8:42, and I'm starting up at 8:50 on my phone. Mine's maybe off. It's actually, my phone says
Whoa.
37, so I'll start at 45 if you have a Verizon phone. 8 minutes. You got 8 minutes, all right?
Which isn't like really a release because
Like, you don't put up a private, like, he's not tied to the, but he's supposed to start a side business.
this is
Yeah?
There were
Interesting. Law school, board exam, and everything, you just.
yeah.
Really?
I remember, yeah. I don't remember like that.
And you work for the city government?
No, exactly. Yeah. Oh, the movie. Oh, yeah.
That's interesting. Well, he likes his job, right?
Yeah.
His job.
Well, I like my job. I moved from Chicago out here.
Can I Postmates McDonald's? Is that can I Postmates McDonald's because I'm about to do it?
But if you're gonna,
What a time.
if you're gonna go you have, I'm hired in to start. I'm gonna go
Yeah, he was starting, so I'm not sure. You're not going to. Oh. But you never left. Well, I agree with you. Well, I've been visiting your dad's position.
Alright.
Rolling.
I would love to do running on the side, like house. I just came up with this in my head. Right. Not seeing
Yeah, absolutely.
And then that's my last and final one that I'm missing, but I'm going back on stuff.
I'm sorry. Yeah, for sure.
And that one's about probably more of the stuff, like the KPIs, or it's a continuation.
Let me see. Where's Schoology at? There it is. Now it's going to be.
It's gonna be more, yeah, it's less than 4 metrics.
It's going to be less than 4. Okay,
Yeah.
metric sources and
Yeah.
statistics. So yeah, this is going to dive into actually measuring the KPIs.
Oh, okay,
So,
so yeah, if I can convert that.
A little more technical. Yeah.
Okay, so this kind of exercise of looking at normalcy and exceptions over different time periods, looking at what happens in sequential months, sequential years, this time versus last year, and getting a better understanding of what trends we would expect on a daily, weekly, monthly basis from things like website traffic, conversions, profitability, how much money do you budget for certain things. This will actually come up for other types of activities as well, too. Things that we expect and things that we don't expect. Sure. So, Our goal with analytics, again, is to really understand what's happening in the online space, who's interacting with us, how they're interacting with us, what happens when we take certain digital activities, when we do advertising or email marketing, or do a particular campaign, or do a major change in our website. We want to see how that impacts certain operations, right? We want to be able to identify trends in our key performance indicators. So, for instance, in the example of, well, what happens if we know that a certain time period is coming, and we get to see if we know that February is arriving, we're Hallmark, and instead of 5 million, we invest 2 million more, we have 7 million. We want to be able to have a meaningful way to measure the impact of that. When we talk about conversion tracking in advertising, online advertising, we get to that area, we'll be able to see how when we can track the performance of specific ads, so that we can see, look at performance of our investments there. So we'll be able to identify trends in those sort of key performance indicators. It also gives you an opportunity to start looking for pockets in your business of places where you have high value customers that you want to start investing in more. Where you have high value channels, right? That you see that for some reason, email marketing performs so much better for us than ads. There's a reason for that, maybe, being able to identify why that happens and how to leverage that, which we'll talk about. You may find that certain sources of traffic are a lot cheaper than others, right? You may see that there are times and channels in your business where you are more profitable than other places, or you just get much better performance because you make different investment decisions. So not just what happens in the marketplace that impacts you, but also when you make a particular decision, you want to see how that data is impacted. So maybe you're just reallocating your budget towards different activities, or you're doing a little bit more or less of a particular activity, and something changes really fast. You want to be able to map that performance to what you did that was different, and that's an exception to normalcy as well. A pro tip for anything that we're going to learn, all the activities and tactics and marketing channels and all that stuff, is to build in these sort of analyses ahead of time, right? So if you know that you're going to launch an advertising campaign tomorrow, you're going to do a Twitter ad campaign, and you're going to do ads that are on YouTube pre-roll, right, before other videos play. You know in a month that you're going to do that, right? Build in a time period to look at not just performance within those software programs that we'll look at, but also looking at things like your website analytics and seeing how the traffic from those ads have been in terms of what your typical, like if people come to your website from all these different sources, right? Whether it's advertising or search, or whether they're coming there from email campaigns or whatever activities that you're doing, right? Or just free publicity, right? You can measure all the sources, which we'll see in a moment. Build in a time period to look at not just the performance of that campaign, but also looking at what is normal for you, right? Do we get a higher order value from customers who are purchasing products if they come from advertising? Do we get less from them? Do we make a lot more profit or a lot less profit? Is it even profitable for us? Even though we got a lot of revenue, do we have to spend so much to get those customers that doesn't actually work out for us? So as we go along these functions, and feel free to ask too, like when we get to the topic on email marketing, be ready to ask questions like, well, how would I think of this, the performance of this campaign in the big picture, right? These questions we'll talk about as we go. So, digital marketing, right? We talked about traditional marketing and some of the general marketing strategies like, branding, understanding your value proposition, communicating that, and there's lots of other stuff we get to. But when it comes to digital, you think this is all about data and analysis? Thumbs up or thumbs down? All about data and analysis in digital marketing. Some thumbs up, some thumbs down.
All about it, that's a huge deal.
I would agree with that. The people who say no, why not?
It's also about branding.
Sure, yeah, that's true. More specifically though, in terms of digital, what else do we need to do? As digital marketers, what else do we need to be masters of?
With our customers.
Right, be creative. That creative is incredibly important. It's not enough to be really good at data analysis. it's not enough to be able to go into the programs that we're going to see and be able to mine that data and see, well, this one performed better than that one. There are people out there who are fantastic at the program Google AdWords and search advertising. They're just fantastic at that program and being able to pull out data points and statistics and say this is good, this is bad, etc. But if you tell them to run an end-to-end campaign, to think about the strategy of who to target, how to target them, what to say to them, what language is going to be more relevant to them, what types of imagery to show and follow-up banner ads to them, and what the landing page experience can be like to have the maximum number of people converting, purchasing products or signing up as a lead, and then ultimately be able to then measure that data and really make impactful decisions on that. There's a lot of people who out there who would not be able to do all of those steps masterfully. And that's what I want you to be able to do coming out of this course, to think about the data. But every single function we do, we're going to talk about the strategy behind it, some of the creative concepts that you use to test things out and make good decisions in terms of communication and design and all of that. And then ultimately to be able to measure the effectiveness of each one of those functions, to know which metrics matter and how do they impact our performance financially as a company. So essentially, analytics aren't everything. You cannot manage your digital marketing efforts solely from a Google Analytics account or from any specific account. You always need to think at every single function that you do when you go back to your company on a day-to-day basis, or you're planning to launch a company. You always have to think about how to empathize with your customers, right? It's called an empathy map for a reason, because we always want to think about our customer interactions. What do our customers do on social media? Why are they on it, right? What types of ads would resonate or headlines would resonate? What are the types of benefits and emotional things would someone resonate with when they're communicating with them as human beings, right? Down to specific things like, would they be more likely to engage with a discounted offer, or would they be more likely to engage with an emotional appeal or an appeal of like a premium product or service that costs more? Are they cost sensitive or not? Are they more focused on those things?
How are we figuring that out?
Well, part by testing. So we'll do this on a function by function basis too. So when we talk about things like advertising, right? And I use that a lot because it's where we invest money. But this actually, you do this in a lot of ways. You can test a headline and see, is someone more likely to respond to something that is, getting 30% off or buying one, getting one free, or are they more likely to respond to another form of messaging? Something that focuses on the premium quality and focuses on maybe the prestige of a product or service. And there are things that you can literally test because you run two campaigns next to each other and you see which metrics, which ones perform better with different metrics.
Doesn't that just bring you right back to analytics then?
It sure does. But you need to know what types of things to even be able to write or try out, right? And that's where the strategy and the creative elements come in. We actually do an entire class on copywriting tactics we can use in digital marketing environments. And we'll see examples being shown in social media, advertising, email marketing, etc. Yeah.
So have you been in a situation with clients who see creative high click-through rates but low conversion rates? So engagement time, but the people actually closing it.
Yes.
And how do you troubleshoot that?
There's two reasons why that happened. There's probably two that come to mind. The first is that it's interesting. It's interesting to people. You can promote, because you can target people in all sorts of different ways that we'll see from session to session. But let's say that you're reaching people with paid media on Facebook, right? You say, I want to reach a certain group of people. And you've got a very specific value proposition that doesn't actually really fit all of those other people, but it's a topic that they're kind of involved in. And you post and you make some kind of a promotion. Maybe it's a video or a banner ad, and it's just provocative, right? It may get a lot of clicks, but if you're not expertly targeting the right people who are willing to actually purchase something right now, you can get a lot of clicks and a lot of interest and spend a lot of money because they're clicking through or they're seeing this campaign. But unless you're targeting the right people, you may not see ultimate conversions and revenue that comes from that. Also, having a having a message and a concept of delivering your value proposition. I remember back to the elevator pitch, right? Being able to say like not just what's distinct about you, but also what is distinct about you that differentiates you from the competition in ways that your customers care about, right? People may think that an image looks cool or that a feature sounds interesting and you might be willing to look at it, but if it's not something that actually solves the core problem of what they're looking to solve, it doesn't meet that need better than other things you can say, and they may not actually end up pulling the trigger and purchasing, and that does happen sometimes. And what it comes down to is the importance of communicating what are the important metrics. You could share an entire report with someone, right? As you go through this program, or this course, I hope that you're actually digging into some of these programs and looking at some of the reports and the data, because that's why we start with data and metrics and talks about this, is because we want every single function after this. Every single function that you touch is going to produce data, so we want you to be able to think about that in a meaningful way as we get to each function. But not every one of those 70 columns in your Facebook Insights report is going to matter. So if you're going to communicate this with your CEO, and they're going to be like, well, I see that we got a 50% higher engagement, or we got 50% higher likes on posts this month. Sure, that may matter if that was your goal, right? But if your goal was to increase sales by a certain amount from a certain types of social media or Facebook posts, then that's a different conversation, right? You may see certain metrics that go up and look good, but unless they're having an impact, or unless they're impacting a revenue-related KPI or something that impacts a revenue-related KPI, it may not be moving the needle in a way. So it's about identifying what are the metrics that matter, and how do I make sure that my stakeholders understand the things that matter. So you're communicating the right stuff. Very kind of vague in general, but we'll keep coming back to this concept again and again. So if we don't consider the creative elements and why the data is better, then our data is meaningless, right? Otherwise, we're at the mercy of the ebbs and flow of performance unless we know the right things to say and how to test them, right? There's a strategy involved, there's a creative involved with it. It's why we need to think both as data scientists and marketing artists, right? Because you can have two different landing pages that you're testing, right? Let's say you do, you've got an email campaign and you want to test out the places that you're sending them to. You send out them to two different designed landing pages. You want to know which one is more likely to convert people at the end once they get to two very different types of pages. That won't really matter a whole lot. That really good A/B test that you do will not matter a whole lot if both pages suck. And when I say both pages suck, I mean like if they're just designed poorly, if you haven't thought about the way that your customer would look for this type of information and the way that those pages would resonate with them, right? If you've got two headlines that you're testing and they both don't mean anything to your customer because you haven't done the thoughtful analysis about your customer and what they care about, and you haven't given that real creative but strategic treatment to it, then again, the data doesn't matter. So the data is only as meaningful as the thought process and the planning behind it, and the creative energy that goes into it. Also, as we go through this, you're going to be coming across lots of data points. So think about that data in the grand scheme of things. A website visit to a company that makes money by serving ads on the site, a website visit to them is very different than a website visit to a company that requires you to go through multiple steps. Put in your email address, sign up for an online account, go into the system, into your account, and start looking at items, and then eventually put it in your shopping cart, and then make a purchase, right? A website visit doesn't have the same impact to them as it does to that company that serves ads the moment you get on that website. Because in the former example, the one that requires that multiple steps, right? You're starting by driving traffic from whatever particular marketing channel, whether it's search advertising, or display, or a social media campaign, or email marketing, and what have you, right? But then they actually have to do things on the website to get them to a certain place. So there's always going to be drop off. At every single step, there's going to be drop off. What's that? Oh, drop off meaning that when you go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. So like, if you got your website visitors and you've got 100,000 people that go to your site, or we'll use e-commerce as the easy example here, then you might only have maybe 10,000 people who are actually actively looking at 2 or 3 products, right? Some people might go to the page and then leave. They might not look at any new products, et cetera. You might have, for instance, 4,000 people who actually put items in their shopping cart, right? You may only have 2,000 people who go to the checkout phase, and you may only have 500 people who actually make a purchase, right? But if you're a media site, then every one of those 100,000 people, if you're a media site that serves ads as your revenue form, then every single one of those people is an opportunity to serve ads. And then rather than focusing on getting those people through a funnel, which is what I'm showing up here, your focus is on getting them to have additional pages per session, to look at more pages so that they can see more ads, which generates more revenue for you. So your business objectives will tell you which metrics are important on your website, for your marketing activities, etc. And then when we look at the difference between different marketing channels throughout this course, right? If you're that media site, then you're going to care about how many pages do people go to when they arrive from Twitter versus how many pages do people go to when they arrive through organic search, because there's a different value to that business for different sources.
Is there a different strategy that, is there a fundamental difference for the approach that you take if you're going from business to consumer model?
Yeah, B2B, you deal with a lot of lead generation. You use different language because you're approaching business professionals more often than not. So it's not that you can't be casual. And I would encourage brands to try and sort of, not get stuck in a box and think you're a professional all the time. But you have to understand that the needs of a person at the workplace in being better at their job or making impact for the company is inherently different than their personal sort of primal needs as a human being. When you think about the Maslow's chart about the things that are being solved for them as individuals when it comes to things like their happiness, like their entertainment, their health and their fitness, products that they need around the house, etc. So there's a different approach to it. But the rules of marketing don't change, right? It's about understanding the market that you're in, understanding your value proposition to the market, understanding people, your audiences, what they want and why they want it. And when they actually have your product or service, if you're successful, what impact does it have in their life or their work or for their stakeholders around them, right? And that has varying degrees of difference in just B2C and in just B2B, depending on who your audience is and what the product category is. What area of product, a low-cost product has a very different impact than a premium product on someone's life, right? Like, and for one, you're trying to get a core benefit. For the low-cost product, you're trying to have a core benefit served, or its core needs served, while not breaking the bank. Whereas a premium product, going from like the cheapest Toyota, to the BMWs, the reason why you buy the car is different, and so you have to communicate and approach people differently when you're marketing to them. Where you're touching into a different need or emotion for that purpose. And it's the same with like B2C to B2B, there's different varying degrees of that. So we're also, and we'll come back to this concept as well, there's a difference between, and I know some of this is hard to read, but I keep it up there for your slides so you can read it later, but there's a difference between marketing to acquire a customer and marketing to acquire a customer for a set period of time or a lifetime value. So a lot of marketers often measure these types of data or these activities to get that first sale. Like, what does it cost to get that sale of a customer, right? When really the question should be, what is the lifetime value of a customer? How much am I willing to spend and how hard am I willing to work in order to get that person initially? And then what am I going to do to extend the life of that customer or to extend the period of time or the value of that customer, right? When you think about, it's like the movie model, right? When you think about movies, a studio doesn't just go for the box office sales, right? The box office sales only represents a certain percentage of that revenue. Where a lot of that revenue comes in is the long tail that adds up over a long period of time. I worked with an independent studio once, and we didn't do a great job of getting exact dollar for dollar ROI return on advertising the movie to getting a box office sales. It was really online sales. And they said, it's hard for us to do this with science right now. It's good for us to get close, but the real money comes in when we do the international sales and the licensing deals and all that stuff. So we want to get as close to dollar for dollar right now as we can. But we know that over time, we're going to be able to look back a year from now and measure what the total revenue from that was and compare it to advertising that we put in right now, right? So you don't get quite the same return, but in the same sense, if you acquire a customer today, you don't know what they're going to spend over their lifetime until you've had customers over a long period of time and you start to develop that trend too. Data normalcy and exceptions work in this context as well. There was a company that I've done some work with that was getting in front of investors, and a big part of this company is a subscription company, and a big part of their ability to convince investors to put in money was, is your business scalable, is it profitable, right? And so the argument was it costs anywhere from $40 to $80 to get a customer, right? And it's a subscription model, like your Dollar Shave Club and all those, so it depends on how many weeks, a customer stays with you. And so the product itself is like $50, right? If you just consider that first or even the second week, when you take out the cost of doing business and all of that, they probably only make like $15 profit after all expenses taken out on a per box that sends on a weekly basis. So if it costs you $80 to get a $15 sale, that doesn't seem that attractive. If you know that a customer is likely to stay with you for 8 weeks on average over time, again, a data normalcy point, like over time, over hundreds of customers, you can get to that point where you say, I know that a customer is going to stay with us approximately 8 weeks, right? Then you have a much different perspective on it, right? Then it's $120 profit or $150 or whatever it ends up being. So that $40 to $80 acquisition cost isn't quite as big of a deal. If you can prove that, then you can make long-term budgeting decisions based on a set of data normalcy that you just uncovered. So this is why marketing has to be involved in other functions. It's because both operationally and financially, you are able to determine this over time if you're tracking it. So in the same way, towards the end of the course, we're going to start talking about things like customer lifetime value and how to measure that so that you're not just focusing on the initial sale. We're also going to talk towards the end of the course about things like retention, like activating customers and getting them ramped up and more likely to spend money, and how to retain them and get referrals from them using digital marketing tactics so that you can increase your CLV and extend the lifetime value of your customer. So this is often called a loyalty loop because the biggest challenge is often getting them to consider, evaluate, and ultimately buy, but it costs to multiples less in order to keep re-engaging them and retain them as a customer and even get referrals from them. Yes.
How do you know what an acceptable acquisition cost is when you're just starting out and you don't know what your CLV is yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. We just launched a company about a week ago. A client just launched, just put their website live. And they were investigating the week before they were challenged on exactly that point. And what they had to do was they had to talk to people. They had to look at, well, first they did a beta test, so they were smart, they kind of put up a sample website. They ran a beta test, they figured out how many weeks people were staying on. But even if you can't do that, you don't have the resources to, you can hop on LinkedIn and you can start talking to people who work in similar industries, have similar sites. You might be able to spend a few $100 on an industry report to find out what other related types of business models are doing out in the world. There may be independent research that's publicly available that shows you that. People ask the same questions, and this will come up. How do I know what a conversion rate is on my site for my type of site, right? I run a B2B type of service, and I'm marketing to this type of individual. If I do good marketing, what should I expect as my conversion rate when I'm paying for ads and sending them to a landing page? There are industry trends. There's, when you get used to it and do it a lot, you start to ballpark what a typical conversion rate might be. But I would always recommend get in touch with a digital marketer at a company that's related to it, especially if it's not a direct competitor, and ask them, right? A few dollars for an email could actually give you a lot of good information. But anyway, to tie this back, this company, what they did was they talked to 3 other subscription service companies that were related but not direct competitors, and they actually got these other companies actually shared with them confidentially their pitches to investors in their Series A round and said, this is actually what our acquisition cost was, and this is how we justified it, and this is what we expected and then what we saw. There are people out there who have a wealth of information that can actually help you to predict these kinds of things. Now there's also industry trends too, so like, a 0.5 to a 2% conversion rate is going to be kind of typical for an e-commerce site that's really developed and optimized pretty well. Maybe less in certain cases, maybe more depending on the kind of company, right? I see something like a lead-driven business. I work with a ton of law firm websites, right? It's just the one agency I work for, they just do all of lawyers and law firms. I know on average, like a well-done landing page for a lawyer from sending the right traffic there will have anywhere from a 5 to 10% conversion rate. Usually like in that 6 to 7 range is pretty good. That's just based on experience of doing this again and again for lawyers in different law offices. But this is very typical for B2B types of companies. So that's why we say like there's a range for e-commerce, there's a range for leads. If you're not asking them to actually do anything, if you're not asking them for credit card information, if you're not asking for more than 4 or 5 fields of information, then it's going to be higher. The more you ask them to do, the lower that rate goes. And so you just sort of start to ballpark what different things will do over time. But you have to start somewhere, and oftentimes it's asking. We'll also see that different marketing activities are useful for certain stages, right? You can do social media for stages that are like closer to the purchasing cycle. A lot of times, social media, we'll get to a matrix later on that better explains it, but social media is often a very good branding tool and an awareness tool, but it's not great at getting that last step before the conversion. It's not often thought of, and it's not often seen in digital marketing as the last place a person interacts before they actually make the purchase. But it assists in the process of getting those conversions. It's why it's like in traditional media, it's hard to justify these, or it's hard to track radio to direct and high ROI, but radio is often thought of as helping with the conversion. Like if you see something on the radio, if you see a commercial on TV, then you get a mailer and you call up, right? So in a similar way, the digital marketing activities have this impact as well. We'll see things like search advertising and email marketing are really good at getting that last touch point before a person actually does something on your website and converts. Whereas things like display advertising and social media are often not thought of as that last action. They just sort of assist in the process. And Google Analytics actually shows us ways that we can measure this impact and start to attribute value to those types of things. There's going to be all sorts of models that we can use, and frameworks, and images, and it's really kind of endless, right? I can show you models up here all day long and try and sort of analyze them. But at the end of the day, we use these types of things, and you're going to find plenty of your own, and you're going to download white papers on digital marketing activities and the hottest trends in social media. Use these as sort of guides and sort of like macro level types of influences to help you better understand things. But at the end of the day, major types of models that will work for you are funnels, conversion funnels. So understanding how people go from just being aware of your business to interacting with you to the point that they go from a non-customer or not even knowing who you are to a customer, those are good models for you to be aware of. Another model to be aware of that is helpful is the customer decision journey, where they also include them being retained as a customer and continuing to purchase from you again and again and start to refer people. It's called the loyalty loop. You'll see data associated with these things that say that it can cost up to 5 to 20 times as much to acquire a new customer as it does to retain existing customers. That's not specific to digital marketing. That is a very old kind of statistic and range, but it gets amplified in the digital world. So. Okay, so we already took our break, but I think we're pretty much ready to go into analytics real quick. So I don't have a ton of time to do this. I want to spend a little bit more time in analytics and start the next class with an activity that was saving towards the end. I'll do this every once in a while because when we're on a discussion point, I want to kind of just keep it natural and make sure we've exhausted the point. So we won't cover all of the advanced tactics. And as we get into more of the advanced tactics like e-commerce tracking and all that, not everyone here has an e-commerce site, so I don't want to use up that time for that. But there's a ton of free videos, and I link you to them from basically each module has its own set of links and documents that you can use to kind of take this further. But e-commerce tracking, multi-channel attribution, which I'll show you, advanced segmentation. There's a lot of things you may find helpful. I would absolutely encourage you to continue after tonight and actually learn more about analytics, but for your business specifically. And I'll be available on office hours to help you. But for now, I'm going to skip all of the remaining 40 slides because it's just looking at views that you can use later on if you need help to do this. But I find it better to actually go into the program itself and tinker around with you guys. So let me hop into Analytics real quick.
Hey, do you want me to go through this example in analytics because it's sort of, if I invited you to join, maybe you can screen share from yours?
Can you do that?
I can. Yeah, okay. Here, let me try that.
I'm going to start with one of these, but then
see if we can do it.
You mean the website you're working on that gets a lot of traffic?
No, on like for you for this.
Oh, right.
So like, it's not recording like the screen.
It's probably okay for now.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah. Just point up at the screen, it'll be okay. Because I'm just going over macro level stuff. I'm getting to see the exact numbers on that recording.
Okay.
Okay. Seven seconds. All right. Okay. So. The website. Okay. This is that t-shirt company that I was talking about before. So this is a business where it's basically like a Shopify site. So I'm going to go to just so you get the context of what this site is. Clothing technology, hydrophobic t-shirts. Oh no, it's all stained. But it's not stained.
I've been for stuff.
Yeah.
It's a Shopify site. They've got versions for like, they've got versions for adults, different, a few different colors, women, a hat now apparently. Oh, they did have baby clothes. Oh no, they do, baby's white t-shirt. So he does, and this is basically like his business. He does a certain amount. He hasn't really like scaled it. He hasn't done investment and all that. So he does enough to, kind of support him and his wife up a bit. And he has future plans for like other things like chef jackets and medical coats and all that stuff that I'm sure he's in the works somewhere. So typical e-commerce site, you kind of go through the site, you can learn more, you can buy now. Not incredibly optimized for performance, but you can get through relatively quickly, go and add to a cart, purchase, check out. And you're basically going through a funnel where there's drop off at every stage, right? So it's only a certain number of people get to each next step until finally you get down to a certain number of people out of your total website visitors who actually make the purchase, right? So the metrics that this guy cares about, of course, are things like conversion rate. What is the percentage of people who make it to the site, who actually make it to the end? And he also cares about things like what is the drop off at each rate, and some other metrics that you care about. And of course, total traffic. If he has the same exact conversion rate, which we'll take a look at what that is, then if he increases this number, then ultimately that number at the end will get larger as well. So, okay. Context then. So let's go into the analytics and see. I want to describe some of the important features of this, talk about some of these metrics, and then we'll very briefly go through some of the things that you can measure in Google Analytics. And this is going to be, the structure and format of this is basically the same for no matter what site that you are using. It's just going to be the metrics that you look at and reports in here you look at are going to be different based on your company's needs. So right off the bat, let's do some definitions here. Users is basically the number of users that have had at least one session during the specific time range that I'm looking at, right? the percentage of people who are just that having at least one session changes if I go from 1 month to 2 months, right? So if I've been to the site twice over the period of 2 months, I went once in January, once in February. If they choose the time period of January and February, I'm one user, right? If they look at a report in January, I'm one user. And if they look at another report in February, I'm another user again. Make sense? So the number of sessions is the number of individual times that someone came to the site, a separate time that you came there. So I may be one individual, one unique user who came to the site twice in a day. I went to the site, I closed out, I came back later in the afternoon. I could have one user with 2 sessions. During those sessions, I may have gone to 2 or 3 pages. So let's say I went to the website and went to 3 pages, each of those times that I went. I'm one user who had 2 sessions during that day, and I had 6 total pages that I viewed. Following? Okay. So this is why we see different numbers for user sessions and page views. You will notice that the number of sessions and page views are correlated by this statistic called pages per session, naturally. If you take 25,000 divided by 11,000, you're going to get this 2.28, saying that the average, some people are viewing 1 page and leaving, some people are viewing 10 pages. But on average, people are viewing approximately 2.3 pages when they come to the site. On average, they're also staying at the site for 1 minute and 27 seconds. On average, some people are staying for only 5 or 10 seconds. Other people are staying for 10, 20, up to 30 minutes. There is a cutoff that you can control. The average cutoff for Google to say this session is dormant, the person is no longer on the site, is about 30 minutes. So if you leave your tab open for 30 minutes, your session will continue in terms of what Google is measuring as a session, but then after 30 minutes of inactivity, meaning you're not clicking around on the site, Google assumes that you're really dormant and turn that session off. So this number has an upside, but you'll find relatively few people are on the site for a long period of time when it comes to people who are kind of like actively moving around. But it does affect it. So the reality is that it might be a little bit lower.
I just got confused when what they're doing when you're going and they're leaving it, they're gonna look at it as a 30-minute period, then you really, that kind of throws everything off.
A little bit, yeah. And the theory is that it's a smaller percentage of people who are browsing your site actively, so Google factors that in. And they change with that. I mean, you can also on your site control that too. So for instance, if you're a site that has long pieces of media on it, that you have, it's very typical that you have like a 20 or 30 minute video that's playing and you want people to view, you have the ability in the settings to extend that period of time so that Google doesn't consider that to be a dormant view. Or like if it's YouTube, right? YouTube uses something that's a little bit more advanced than Google Analytics, I'm sure. Because there's much more advanced versions of this type of program. But YouTube, for instance, and some people would watch video to let it go in front of them, right? After 30 minutes, I can see another dormant user, and actually they might actually be watching something for an hour or a bunch of videos streaming together. So that's why they always change this. The bounce rate is not the percentage of people who didn't like your website and left. Very typical people think, oh, it's because people don't like our site. Bounce rate is defined as the percentage of people who came to a page on your website from somewhere off of your website. They arrived at your website, and rather than going to other pages on your website, they left. It doesn't mean that they weren't interested. It just means that they only went to one page before they left. So there's a lot of companies out there where you only need to go to one page, right? If you're an informational type of site, or you're a media site that has like news articles or a video and it's a very specific topic, someone may only come to that page and they only need to come to that page before they leave. So certain media sites may have higher than average bounce rates if it's like a marquee article on a really special event, or it's someone shared a funny video on Facebook, and once you're done watching that video, you leave, right? So I always say take bounce rate with a relative grain of salt, right? If your website inherently needs people to go to multiple pages in order for you to consider them a good user or an active visitor, then bounce rate matters a little bit more. And any website that has a really high bounce rate, you know, if you're talking about like an 80 or 90% bounce rate, you need to start looking into why are people bouncing off the site, what pages are they going to, et cetera. Yes, I had a couple questions over here.
When you talk about a good bounce rate or a good session duration, is that vary wildly from in every instance, or is there?
It will. It's hard, yeah, it's hard to say what a good or bad bounce rate is, because it is gonna vary from company to company. The number of pages people go to, the amount of time they spend on your site. It's almost like you want it to be relative to, like if you're looking at two sources of traffic, and I'll show you guys acquisition reports, so you can see like what happens from social media users versus search advertising users. You'll compare the differences between those two groups of people, and there's a lot more than just these metrics. But you can see all of these metrics for just email marketing, or just social media, or just Facebook and then versus Twitter, right? So you'll start to gather these types of data. We haven't even looked at the number of conversions that happen yet from different sources, but that'll have an impact as well. So there's also a report on here that shows you industry benchmarks as well. So they're rough benchmarks, and Google will never name the companies that you're being stacked up against. But for instance, if you have a conversion rate in here, or a bounce rate, or an average session duration, or a number of pages per session, it'll categorize, whatever your site is categorized in by Google, it'll compare you to the thousands of other websites in the US that are in that general category, and you can see whether or not your metric is higher or lower in comparison. We'll take a look at that at a good time. Yes?
What about a scrolling one-page website, like, it's on the one page. But it's
Yeah.
fine. So am I gonna have 100% bounce rate?
If you truly only ever have one page that they can go to, then yeah, you probably have a pretty 100% bounce rate. However,
The time on page might be wrong.
yeah,
Time on page.
this goes back to the idea that, and we're gonna see this again and again, whatever the metric is, the metric that you're looking at is not gonna be important to every single business out there. Your company, if it's truly one page, bounce rate is not gonna be a relevant metric for you to worry about all the time, because it inherently is going to have a high bounce rate, whether or not your business is successful.
So you're more like installing an event on the contact form, not saying how many times that submit on this.
Yeah. So custom events, other forms, other ways, there are gonna be other things for you to track that bounce rate may not be as important. Yes?
What if you see like a big, part of the that was like actually happened to me, and I wasn't sure what happened. It went from like 40% bounce rate to like 2% overnight,
To what percent?
like 2 or 3%. And it's really-
So it went down.
Right, like
Significantly.
huge, and I have no idea what that
I've never seen a 2% bounce rate, but I guess your page is really interesting.
It was like an overnight thing, and I just didn't know what to do.
Definitely. So that's kind of where we're going to next, in the sense of that's a great thing to observe. And then I would look at like where the time frame is. Like, you know, you can look at over time, I'm gonna look at sessions, I'm gonna change the thing that I'm viewing here to bounce rate, right? And I can see over time how the bounce rates change. But you're saying basically that it like went way down, right? So once you identify the time period, then I would start looking at things like, well, what changed on my website in terms of like who came to my website, right? Maybe there's a certain campaign or a traffic source that became the primary traffic source for the site, or was so much that that difference was hugely offset. This is all weighted averages, by the way, right? Without digging further, we don't know if 90% of this came from organic search, or social media, or email marketing, or display advertising, or search advertising. We don't know anything about this, except this is the entire average for this period of time, right? It's only until we slice and dice this down even further and dig that we can start to see some things that are relevant and paint us more of a picture. But this is kind of like the highest level overview, yes.
If you look at those bounds for business and the time spent on site for visits, and that would be some indication of, you know, whether they're bouncing because they're interested in content page, or actually interested in content, or they ask them through.
The way that you would look at this is you would dig down to specific segments. So it's very rare that you're ever going to go in here and try and like work it down to like look at every single individual session, right? But you can slice it up in a way where you're looking at like, okay, let's look at the people who converted, and then let's look at the data around those people. So you can look backwards and say if someone actually purchased on their site, then let's look at the characteristics of those people. Those people may have spent, 5 minutes on the page. They may have gone to 7 or 8 pages instead of just going to 2 or 3. Right? So you can kind of reverse engineer the profile of an online visitor. Because again, you can't identify anyone who goes on here. Right? There's privacy laws that prevent you from being able to identify these people. They are simply IP addresses and numbers, right? It's tracking people based on IP address and it's roughly locating where they are, but you're not getting their name and phone number. You can do that with other software programs out there, where when someone comes to your site, you cookie them, and as soon as they identify themselves on your site, you can create a profile in your CRM system. We don't go into that level of the strategies around that, but there's a lot of software out there, like marketing automation software and CRM systems that will allow you to do that. Yes?
So we have a lot of photographers that we work with, and they're constantly on slides, and they're images, and so if I'm going to try to figure out who it is, that's a customer versus a photographer, is it kind of looking at that kind of normalcy aspect again of like, consistency of site traffic from them, and where there's distinctions that we do?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways you can go about this. I'm not going to spraying up clean spray. There's a certain number of people, and if you can estimate a certain number of people who are not your customers or not your audience, like you know that 20% of people who come to your site or 20% of the visits come from photographers, then you could use various statistical techniques to say that the range of what you expect to happen, the range of normalcy, is probably a little bit less because it's a little bit more amplified by the people who are not your customers. Also, if you know who the people are, you get their IP. Like this is great for like a company headquarters, right? You know the range of IP addresses at your company headquarters. You know a lot of people there who go to the site all the time, every day, or on multiple pages because it's their company. Then you can do these things called IP filters that actually create a segmentation so that you only viewing all of this data when it's not one of those IP addresses. I just did this exercise with this company that we were just launching, and it's early on, so we've only got like 1,400 sessions, unique sessions of people visiting the site, and 200 of those sessions came from, or like 1 out of 6, or 1 out of 7 of those sessions was an internal person, employee. That's a significant amount of data that we want to exclude when we're making decisions about what users are doing on the site. That's another way to do it. There's a handful of other ways too. Questions on these data points before we continue, the definitions of them? The only thing I didn't mention was, new session. That's saying that the number of people who have not been to the site before. I think, although I'm going to look at this, first time visits. I'm 90% sure that it is as long as the person has not registered a visit from that IP address before. It may be related to their cookies, but I don't know exactly for sure. It's possible that if they cleared their browser history, they may be considered a new visitor. I don't know that for sure though, but it's one of the two. It's either from that IP address hasn't been logged, or it's because their browser history hasn't been cleared and they've been to the site, or they haven't been to the site before. So you'll see this number goes a lot higher the more paid media that you do. You'll see this number goes higher because you're reaching more new people who have not experienced your brand yet. As you get more active users, for instance, like Netflix, if they were to use Google Analytics, would have a lower percentage of new sessions because a lot of people will come back to the site and streaming to their computer or tablet. So if it's not in the app, yes.
What about your mobile device? If you're using a mobile device, is that
It's the way that the IP address is launched. So for instance, analytics may measure everyone who goes to this, if they ever went to the site right now,
they may actually consider you guys to be one user if you're logging in or not. But your device may log in differently. I don't know that the technical, the details technical behind that. But if it's logged in a different device, it will probably be a separate user, most likely. If you're logging on from like your same computer at your device has to get you, and the IP address has to get you, combined creates a single user. So if I have 5 different devices in my home, it's probably going to be considered 5 different users, but then logging twice from my computer, it's still going to be considered 1 user. So naturally, this doesn't represent perfectly what real life is, right? Because of these answers to these questions. But in the aggregate, it generally does. We consider the fact that this is not 100% perfect data because one person could use a product device, right? One person could be creating a browser history and have to decide whether they use considered another user. Especially if you log into a website at home and then come to work or General Assembly and log in again, right? If I'm excluding my IP address at home, but then I come here and log into that website, which I've done, I'm now being tracked even though I'm an internal employee or consultant. So my view doesn't really have an impact on what's really happening on the site. So we have to take it roughly with a grain of salt, but as these numbers get higher and higher, the impact of internal people and the impact of multi-device users starts to kind of get more fuzzy and fuzzy. Point is, don't worry about it too much as the company and the website performance changes. So other high-level things that we can look at. The language setting for browser, right? So this company, interestingly enough, this t-shirt company, this guy came from Australia, but the language setting, right? There's different versions of English settings for different browsers: Australian, Mexico, US, Britain, etc. That they're basically like English language, but he only has US English browser setting, like people with US English browser setting, like for their Chrome, right? Chrome has different versions of the English language for people who live in different countries, right? And so that's why you see this kind of spread out, because he's shipping internationally, he was advertising internationally, and he was able to ship his products around the world. Most US companies that are primarily operating in the US will have a much higher percentage. Close it a little more. We'll have a much higher percentage in this top category right here. You'll see a lot of like 80 to 95% as the range. But when it's a truly international company, it's more spread out. You'll also see things like the country that which people originate. He happens to have a lot more sessions from Mexico for some reason. We can potentially see if that traffic of most of the sales are coming from Mexico, but maybe about 50% more than people who are actually visiting from the United States. And you can also see things like the top cities, for things like Mexico City, Melbourne, etc. There are times when Google Analytics is not great at capturing data. Even though it's 1,000 sessions, which seems like a really big deal, it's basically like 9% of total traffic. So there's various reasons why this information is not full or not able to be captured. You can also see things like the percentage of people who are using different browsers. And you can see the versions of those browsers as you get deeper. Certain operators, Windows, Android, iOS, Mac, Linux, etc. Different service providers, like Verizon, and other ones, Time Warner, and other ones that are probably based in Mexico.
And then they're assuming that that's going to affect the sale.
We care about this because we can chop up this data in so many different ways that we may see specific trends, right? Like here's, for instance, an operating system, right? If I go further, and I'm going to go away from this for a second, and I'm just going to Windows, right? I can then see all of these metrics that are weighted and sort of aggregated. I can see this, all of this data next to each other. So I can see the number of transactions and the amount of revenue that come from people who are using the Windows system. If I compare this to Mac users, or if I compare one browser to another browser, I may see trends that show, oh, people who are on Chrome have a much higher conversion rate than people who are on Firefox. When's the last time you tested your website on Firefox, the latest version of Firefox, right? What could happen on Firefox if you have a lot of errors on your site, and people aren't necessarily converting there because it looks like garbage and it doesn't work, and you click that purchase button and nothing happens, right?
Site testing in QA is very important, and you can see trends in analytics that will point you to problems. There have been plenty of times when I've helped with a website redesign, and then following that redesign, we noticed that we weren't getting conversions, or we were having really low pages per views, low site time, and we went and digged. We dug into those operating systems, those devices, those mobile devices. We looked at like the Android Galaxy S3, and we discovered, oh my goodness, there's a huge problem on Galaxy S3 that we wouldn't have known unless we saw terrible data associated with that device, right? So this is especially useful, not just in understanding consumer behavior, but also understanding your own quality assurance on programs. So let's go back a little bit.
Is there a way to make this analytics software flag stuff that's maybe an outlier compared to other segments?
I believe so. I don't do that often. I haven't done that before, but I want to say yes. It's a rule you can probably set up, and if they can't, there's definitely third-party software that sits on top of that analytics that will do that for you. There are custom dashboards that you can set up that will, where you can put in whatever other kinds of reports that are well beyond the generic ones that we use. So let's go a little further. We've got about 15 minutes left. I want to give you some more uses on how to analytics. And I'll set you guys off to do this on your own. So, okay. So we've got various types of audience reports that we can look at, right? This is kind of like the overview of all the people that come to our website and the general traffic. Other things we can do is, this is just looking 30 days back, right? I can change it to 7 days, and apply it, and it looks at just the 7 days, right? I can look at just yesterday, see individual data points, right? And see at the different hours of the day and look how widely that fluctuates for different time periods during the day, right? Interestingly, the 4 a.m. to noon is kind of when it peaks, and then in the nighttime it goes down. But also consider that this is a company that has traffic internationally, right? So that is that. Now, you may assume, if I look at a 30-day period, you may assume that this number of daily visitors, like 356, it's sitting close to around like 350, 400 or so, is around the average. So we may assume that that's pretty much what happens, at all times. I don't exactly know what I'm going to see when I do this. I have a feeling I understand what's going to happen, but let's take a look at this data when we look at it long term. This is the example I was talking about before. Can you guess when he got a whole lot of press coverage or a few big site links after him? It's right here. And he got like in the thousands, 9,000 sessions in one day. This is when he got his an article on like Mashable or something as a cool new tech gadget, right? If I were to look at his sales from that day and a couple days afterwards, it was a lot higher than the site average. So when I say that the time period has an effect on context, it absolutely does. If I go to, this is kind of what his normalcy is. These are his exceptions in these particular places because he got something happened externally, even though it was driven by a marketing activity. He got press coverage online, and a lot of people went to the site. Because he got a lot of press coverage from a couple reputable sites, and we'll cover this in SEO, Google also saw his website as more relevant to new rows in the search rankings too. So the search performance was higher, and he also got a lot of direct traffic from third parties. So this time period thing does make a difference because, again, it's all about the context. It's all about what are you comparing it to over time. So let's go further. Let me go back to, I'm going to do maybe a range of, no, I'll stick with this here because we have higher numbers overall. So next, let's go to some demographics, right? So over time, this is over all of the sessions that come to the site. We see that Google can collect a certain amount of data from people, and it samples this data, right? It doesn't know all of the information. People doesn't always know what someone's age is or gender is or whatnot. But if you think about the fact that a lot of us are actually signed in to our Google account most of the time, and in order to have a Google account, we have to give information about when we were born, what our gender is, etc. Right? So Google has general information about the people who come to a site, how old they are, whether they're male or female, etc. Over time, I guarantee you that the number of demographics you can see here will increase, because Google's going to be developing more and more partnerships with third parties. When we get to social media analytics and we look at Twitter and Facebook, we're going to be able to get a lot more data on people and say, oh, not only do we know that they're between the ages of 24 about 40% of the time, but we also know that they like the Twilight movies and they're interested in lifestyle and fitness brands, and they like Oakley and that kind of stuff. Because more of these big companies, whether it's Google or Twitter or Facebook, they develop partnerships with other companies that share private data between them. They don't personally identify you, but they share data from those profiles between the companies, so they get a sense of who's coming to the site. Even if you don't identify yourself on that site, you've been identified on another site, and that travels to that analytics program. It's a little bit scary in Big Brother, but that's the role we live in. Yes.
Can you enable advertising features to get deeper demographic information? People that look at our
Yeah. So under acquisition, I can see my AdWords performance. I can bring in the AdWords here. There are ways to manually import all of your other advertising campaigns and other programs outside of AdWords. They make it easy because it's another Google program. You can do the same thing with your search optimization. We'll come back to this when we get to SEO. Oh, that's not enabled on this one. But you can see like which keywords are getting you organic traffic that you don't actually have to pay for, and which keywords are better performers for you and all that. So that's, you get a little bit of demographic data, which is relevant. It's relevant for us to know that 73% of the people who come to this website are male, and the age range that they're in, mostly between ages 18 and 34, right? That's a significant impact on if he scales his business, he needs to know who his customers are. He needs to know what kinds of products. If he's going to make an investment with his limited funds and invest in another set of products or expand the product line, he's probably going to focus on product for men, basically. He could invest the same amount of money in products for women, but he may not get as much of a return than if he expands the product line. He might do both, and he might allocate more money, just simply from this. I would test it with other things, but I would at least start to think, I want to go towards that direction, and focus on what are the products that these groups would be interested in. Okay. So Google also looks at the other types of websites that these people are looking at. Google has a network of about 2 or 3 million different websites that it can display ads on, that partner with Google to show advertising. These websites have to have codes on their site so we can connect them. A lot of websites out there also use Google Analytics. There's a benefit for this being free program because Google can watch as people go from one website with Google Analytics to another website with Google Analytics and start to learn about these people's user behavior and learn about the types of websites they go to, good or bad. So things that we know about the people who go to this guy's website is that they love movies, they're technophiles, they're TV lovers, news junkies and avid readers. Some of them are hardcore gamers, right? So these are basically, and it's looking at a sample of about 58% of these total sites. So you're starting to see what some of these trends look like, right? We're guessing that, we could probably guess that the 18 to 34 range, or whatever that was, movie, technophiles, TV lovers, like media people, right? These are people who generally like media formats in a number of different ways.
Okay, I'm totally confused about how that's measured. Is that taken with people that have already gone to this site or her site, and that's what these affinity categories are? That's what the percentages are, or is it of the whole Google ecosystem? 6.10% of the people are.
It's the first one. So basically, it's looking at 58% of his traffic fits into these categories, and it's looking at these percentages here, like the 6% of them, of these 58% of them, 6% of them are movie lovers, 6% are technophiles. There's going to be some overlap, but it's how Google is classifying it. So
they would know that because those same people that use Google in other ways.
Those same people who is pulling into this, and we're talking about like over like 100,000, probably 150,000 people based on the number of sessions, that you're saying that maybe 6% of those 100,000 people, 150,000 people are going to other sites in the Google network that are the types of sites related to movies during this time period. So it's finding ways to assign characteristics to his website traffic.
Using the whole Google ecosystem to compare. Okay.
Because Google has to have a way to look at other places that user, the website is referred to.
In order to
Yeah, and that's the benefit of Google being free services that Google Analytics is everywhere. So it can track you going from point A to point B because Google Analytics is both places. Go first, Mark. Creepy, I know.
For Google Analytics to do this, you have to put a piece of code on your site. Is that how they are able to get this information?
Yeah, because that and partner sites, right? So like, I would guess that some of this information also comes from the things that people click on Facebook or whatever too, and other types of sites that gather a lot of this fancy data. Because these are general categories. This isn't like, this is what Google defines, but these are, people who love movies. That's defined in a lot of ways in other types of platforms and social media networks and whatnot. But the easiest way for Google to do this is because there's hundreds of millions of sites, probably hundreds of millions of sites or more that are using Google Analytics because it's an industry standard platform. This software is free and incredibly advanced. So a lot of companies, most companies don't need to use something that's more advanced than this unless they're looking for levels of analytics that Google cannot provide. But pretty much anyone in this room will gain some benefit from being able to use this free software program. The minority of companies need something a lot more advanced or proprietary.
So when you sign up for Google Analytics, can it tell you retroactively, like all your page views and everything?
No.
So it'll only tell you from the day that you sign up.
From the day that you sign up. So if you want to start gathering data, get it out in a second.
Yeah.
And start measuring from there, yeah.
Can you specify what's how to say just months this which rather than say
Yeah, so if I change this, and it's a good question, if I change this data should adjust. So the numbers have changed a little bit. And we see mostly the same breakdowns, but they change a little bit. Also, site to site will be incredibly different. These categories from a different website in another industry will have a very different trend. So again, think about this in terms of what kind of, like if you were a company that has millions of dollars that you invest or hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Think about what types of ads you would start showing to these people, right? Based on the demographics and what they're interested in. What kind of commercials you would run. What types of messaging and language you would use, right? This is where looking at data helps inform your creative decisions and your strategic decisions, right? If you're going to do a co-branded sponsorship with another company, it starts giving you ideas on where you're going to co-brand your company, what types of partnerships you might set up that are not necessarily exactly related to what you sell, but have an affinity with kind of your product category, right? He might pair up with people with media type companies if he's going to do partnerships and branded sweepstakes and stuff like that. So that comes across in a lot of ways in digital marketing. That is a question for me. Yes.
So do they also show how the general population breaks down? Because 6.5% really large, well, I don't know what it is, more or less than the general population. But if it's equal to the general population, then it's
Or is it
everyone,
Google
so, the Google universe.
That's great. I'm gonna write that down because I don't know.
Because what I want to see is it more or less common, more percent, more or less than.
I bet if I Google it, there's like reports on that, but I'll look that up for you and post that after this. Sounds great. All right, so let's go a little bit further into audience overview. We'll go, can I go 5 minutes over? All right. And then we'll pick up next time on acquisition and SEO, and then we'll do an activities at the beginning.
your cost of editing?
Oh, it is? Good. Okay. Perfect. I've got 10 minutes then. Okay. All right, so we can also see what happens based on location, right? So let's say we want to look at just the sessions in the United States. Then all of a sudden we can look at what our performance is like from state to state. You can imagine that we get all sorts of ways that we can customize and change this data infinitely, right? So we can see that he gets a lot more in California, New York, Texas, Florida, naturally because these are more populated states, right? And we can see that generally things like bounce rates, percentage of new users, sessions, average session duration, it doesn't change all that much, right? we can think of this in different ways, right? We can say like, well, why do people in, you know, a certain state like Washington have only half the conversion rate of someone in New York, right? And there are certain websites and certain companies where this becomes more of a factor because of the way that you're advertising. You know, if you're taking one same message and doing your ads all across the country, people may resonate with a particular message differently in different states or locations. As you get more, as your company grows and you get more budget, more time, more resources, you have to start thinking about the way that you're engaging with people in different areas and customizing it for those different segments, right? This is kind of still small. We're talking about a number, 459 transactions. So we're not going to see huge differences. This range here of around a little bit less than 1% to around 1% is pretty typical for like the total number of visits. Like this falls into that 0.5 to 2% conversion rate for an e-commerce site. I would be surprised if one of these states had like a 5% or a 4% conversion rate. That's the kind of thing that we might look for if we were going to make a judgment about marketing to these different states. But these are relatively the same. However, we may want to look at what is the difference between different countries, for instance. So when we go back to right. So now I'm looking at a country level. I'm seeing that, interesting, there's 2,400 visits from Mexico during this time period, although this is the last 30 days. But the conversion rate is 0.04%, right? So all that traffic that we got from Mexico doesn't seem quite as relevant when it comes to revenue. I can do infinite numbers of reports and segmentations. My point is that as you break down the data, you can start to see different trends and learn different things that will inform your marketing decisions. All right, let's take a look at other things like, and again, this is all based on our audience analysis. Like what we see in Chrome, we get a lot more visitors from Chrome, 60%. And we can see that although a lot more users come from Chrome, we have a lower conversion rate. Something to perhaps look into because we have even though, but again, it's 14 transactions a month. If I change the time period again, these are bigger fluctuations. When I spread the time period back to 2013 and begin to normalize my data, I look at Chrome, Safari, and Firefox, and they're a little bit closer. Chrome is still a lower performer. So this might tell me I need to start checking all the various versions of Chrome and start looking at the versions and see maybe there's certain ones that this site is not optimized for. This could take me in a lot of different directions. Also interesting is the overview of devices. Desktop, mobile, tablet. You can see 34% of the people who go to the site came from a mobile device. That's significant. This number for mobile and tablet has been increasing for most sites over time. It's followed a pretty particular trend. But this, I mean, you're talking about 48% here. That's actually, I think that's probably pretty high. This number has been increasing a lot over time. And we can see what's interesting is that desktop conversions are still twice what mobile conversions are at this point, like the percentage that happens. So again, you have reasons to start digging in. Have you mobile optimized your site? Is it convenient for someone to convert on your website from a mobile device? In general, it might be less for the most part. Like no matter what you do, it could be harder for someone to convert and purchase a product or sign up for a service by filling out a bunch of forms on their device. But are there things you can do to make it easier for them? Are there ways you can optimize your site better so that you can maybe not match it, but increase this conversion rate over time? That benchmark report, and then I'll let you guys go, is you can look at industry trends. I don't know if it's going to load, but there's a particular product category that it gets into that Google's identifying now. So let's see what he's in. Shopping, right? Shopping is a pretty general topic, so we're basically talking about an e-commerce site, right? But if we're looking at, if we want to see this, he's compared against how many sites? 63,000 other web properties. And these are he's classified by about 100 to 500 daily sessions. So he's not being compared to Macy's.com. He's just being compared to smaller e-commerce sites, right? So now I can start to view all of these data points in comparison to other companies across this type of website. So we're seeing that maybe his session duration is lower, his pages per session, his percentage of new users are higher, and his percentage of overall sessions the traffic is higher. So you can customize these columns in all sorts of different ways. You can put in your conversion rate, your number of transactions, et cetera, and start to see, well, if I want to know how I'm doing as a general e-commerce site, I can start to see this data compare.
But they're not going to be able to direct sites that you again.
No, because they, you know, yeah, that'd be like giving someone access to your analytics and, you know, it would be, no one would use it if they didn't have access. But it's true that it's all anonymous, just like the users who come to the site are anonymous. Okay, so we'll pick up with acquisition when we come back next week, and we'll start an activity to work on this kind of stuff. But I will see you guys on Tuesday. No class on Thursday, naturally. Because we're not nerds.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So I'm gonna be out of town next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay, we're all
How
busy.
can I view, assuming you guys are successful recording it, will it be astrology?
No, it won't. I'll actually